indivisible,
liberty, and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Let me forward something here. Something pops up, I gotta click yes to. Okay, first, if he's on the call, Peter Furley, who I'm nominating for the Ethics Commission. Peter, are you on the call? If not, we'll get back to Peter. Yes, Sharon, you can give him a holler if you like. Next, Teresa Frederick, candidate for the Board of Appeals. Hi, Teresa. Typically, what we do, Teresa, is let you say a few words about yourself, and if the council cares to, throw a softball question at you here and there, that's great. So the microphone is yours, Teresa.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mayor. So as you can see by the resume that I put together here, I have an extensive background in construction. I've lived in Chesapeake Beach for going on 6 years now. I love the town. I love the surroundings, and just want to make sure that we all have a great community to live in. And I'm excited to be able to give back to the town and volunteer in this process.
Very good, thanks. Starting with Derek, does the council have any questions?
All right, well, I'll try to throw a
I-
softball at you, Teresa. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thank you for volunteering for planning and zoning. Just a question, have you been following the comprehensive plan process that planning and zoning has been working on? I mean, I guess my question is, do you know what you're getting yourself into?
I have been in on some of the meetings. I've attended virtually some of the meetings and understand some of the things that are working through town council and planning and zoning. And so I can't say that I'm well versed in everything that is going on with planning and zoning, but I have been involved in some of it, yes.
Okay, good. And just generally, what are your thoughts? We kind of put planning and zoning on a compressed schedule to finish the comprehensive plan. What are your thoughts of the process and which you've witnessed so far?
Well, I think there's a lot of plans in process. I think there's some great ideas out there that can definitely bring benefit to the community. I think it's the compressed schedule, I think, is going to be very demanding for everybody and challenging. But I think with the group that we have in planning and zoning, I think they can accomplish it.
All right, great. Well, thank you again for volunteering and for joining us. It's a pleasure to meet you, and look forward to seeing you as part of that group and helping in this very important process.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you.
Right. Keith?
Thank you, Mayor. Hi, Teresa. Nice to meet you. And thank you for joining us tonight. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right, wonderful. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you. It was really nice, great that folks are so willing to volunteer to help out the town. You've answered a lot of kind of the preliminary questions we often ask about how long you live here and why and that kind of thing. I was just curious if you could just elaborate a little bit more about what drew you to the Board of Appeals over, I guess, other types of service.
So sure. So actually, I have a neighbor, Kathleen Beralt, that lives up the street from me, that is on the planning and zoning, and she approached me with the position being open and see if I had some interest in that. I have like many other people, have a demanding career And so I did want to give back to the town, but I didn't think I could be very, I didn't think it'd be beneficial for either one of us on, say, planning and zoning, which is going to require so much time. My job takes me out of town a lot, but you know, it's. I still wanted to be able to contribute some way to the town, so I thought this would be a great fix.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I think you know, from your resume, it looks like you would be quite an asset as well. So thank you very much again for doing this, and look forward to hearing more from you and the Board of Appeals in the
Great,
future.
thank you, Keith. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Greg, any questions?
Yeah, the agenda says that she was a candidate for Board of Appeals. I hear people asking Planning and Zoning Commission questions. Which is it?
It's Board of Appeals.
Okay, because Derek had
Yeah,
said Planning and Zoning, and the applicant actually went on to say that she was.
Well, let me just help you out here. Okay, no one ever said it was planning and zoning. Okay, it's Board of Appeals. Do you have any questions for the candidate for Board of Appeals?
Yeah, if you will, Mr. Mayor, let me just answer Greg's question. Yeah, that was my mistake. You know, I asked those questions because I was on Board of Appeals, and, you know, on Board of Appeals, you hear cases related to planning and zoning. So I was really just more interested in her thoughts on planning and zoning and what they're doing. And then I should have been a little more specific in how to transition that to Board of Appeals. So that was my mistake.
Oh, that's okay. I was a little confused. For Board of Appeals, okay. I see you've living in the town for 6 years. One of my questions was what made you decide to throw your hat in the ring? And I think you answered it. I'm just going to paraphrase you a little. You wanted to try to help and you wanted to serve. And you said that Kathleen had approached you about the opening for Board of Appeals?
Yes, she had.
Okay. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Greg.
Okay, Larry?
Thank you. Teresa, welcome. Thank you for volunteering. I'll just be brief and just say that I'm looking at your professional strengths and I see conflict resolution, which is probably a perfect fit for the Board of Appeals. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I do that on a daily basis. So I have a lot of experience at that. The company that I work for, I'm more a corporate. So I deal with all of our manufacturers in our regional offices. And yes, any conflict, you know, I help manage that and work through it. So it is a process that I use almost on a daily occurrence. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Charlie?
Teresa, thank you very much for you know, your willingness to volunteer and help out the town. I don't really have any questions, but I am very intrigued by the career arc defined in your resume. I'm surprised no one else mentioned it. You know, I spent a lot of time up in Cape Cod, and I have some friends who have a place on Martha's Vineyard, and I have been to Provincetown many times, a couple times on an interesting Cape bike trip, and just intrigued by that. But you know, it's not relevant to your role, so you are free to comment or not.
Yeah, thank you. I spent 4 years there. I was part owner and manager of a guest house, and beautiful location. You know, the unfortunate thing was that my business partner had a different plan than I did for the house and for the business. And so I decided to go back to work for the company that I had worked for so long. They wanted me back in a bad way, and but I enjoyed my time there as well, and I go back every year. So it's awesome. I love that area.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Appreciate your willingness to be part of this commission. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. And Valerie?
Yes, first of all, I also want to join in saying thank you for serving, thank you for volunteering. We do appreciate the time and effort. It takes all of us to make this town what it is, and it's wonderful of you to do this. And I don't really have a question, just an observation that your skill set seems to be perfectly aligned to what the Board of Appeals will need. And so thank you for stepping up and thank you for serving.
Thank you, Valerie. I appreciate your input.
Okay, okay, very good. Teresa, thank you very much. Thanks for calling in. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you very much,
Next,
everybody. I
we ha-
appreciate it.
Next, we have Peter Fairley, candidate for the Ethics Commission. Peter, I understand you called in. If you don't mind, you can give us a little, 2-minute, personal profile of yourself and from there. Okay, well, we thought Peter had called in. We can always go back to him later if he calls in later.
It looks like he's muted. So
I'll just, you guys.
sorry, Mayor. It looks like he's here. He's just muted. So I'm sending him a
Okay.
note to unmute.
Sorry, this is Peter. I just saw a signal on my screen to unmute, which I clicked. Am I actually unmuted now?
Yes, thank you.
Can you
Good,
hear
Peter.
me?
Thank you.
Okay.
I can hear you well, Peter. Would you like to say a few words about yourself, and then we'll let the council will probably want to say hello to you.
Okay. Okay. I'm. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. At the mayor's request, I wrote up a little piece of paper which I styled personal profile. I'm sure it was distributed to everybody. And if there's any question about my illustrious background, then I will certainly be very happy to respond. Let me just say, I was involved in with the ethics ordinance from the very beginning, right after the state issued its mandate that even small municipalities like Chesapeake Beach had to have an ethics ordinance and an ethics committee structured analogous to the law that pertains at the state level. That was very new at that point. Previous to that, only the larger municipalities, such as PG County with close to 1 million people, city of Baltimore County, and so on, were subject to this legislative mandate. Smaller communities were exempt, and until the folks in Annapolis decided to require it of everybody. I was a member of an ad hoc committee that had been established by Mayor Bruce Wall to draft the first ordinance. We did that. I think Councilwoman Bodine was also a member of this body, and it was eventually adopted. It has been amended a number of times. Our first version did not meet with the loud applause of the State Ethics Committee, which has supervisory power over all of these things. And I have not been involved with this matter since then. I was contacted by the mayor, would I be interested? I think I owe it to the town to accept this proposal. And I will gladly answer any more questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. And I'll start with Dr. Bodine and see if she has any questions, and we'll go that way.
Hello, Peter, it's Valerie.
Yes, I see you.
Oh, wonderful. It is so good to hear you. I don't really have a question for Peter, but I do have something I'd like to say, that Peter is so well versed in the ethics ordinance, its development, and its need. He's been a long time volunteer on so many committees, both formally and informally. He's a real asset to this town, and the fact that we're lucky enough to have such a respected Chesapeake Beach resident step forward, we are lucky. And so needless to say, I fully support, this is a perfect position for Peter. And I'll always remember fondly when Peter comes in to the public comment period during town council meetings. He always has something to say that is well thought out, well argued, and well articulated. He has been a pleasure to know. And so, Peter, I have no questions for you. You have my full endorsement. This is an absolute perfect position, and we are lucky that you agreed to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie. Charlie.
I don't have any additional questions, Peter. That's certainly quite an endorsement coming from Councilman Bodine, and I look forward to meeting you in person. Thank you.
So
Thank you,
do
Charlie.
I. I hope we will be able to do these things in person soon.
And Larry.
Yeah, Peter, thank you for stepping forward. We have met in the past. I was fortunate to have served on planning and zoning with Nancy, and I'm certainly saddened to hear of her passing. I hope we get a chance to see each other again, but not as a formal matter before the Ethics Commission. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've known Peter peripherally, I don't know for how many years, probably started when I started attending meetings at Town Hall years ago. Appointment of Peter to the Ethics Commission seems like a no-brainer. And that's kudos to the mayor for vetting him there. His analytical thinking and his love for the town, those are things you're going to get with Peter. I know that. The town is served well by people like Peter. I can't speak without mentioning Nancy, who loved serving the town. And Nancy was an inspiration to me to serve and advise to pay attention to things. Would love to hear some of your scuba stories down the road, Peter. I'm really glad that you're going to serve the town. Awesome.
Thank you, Greg. Keith.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Peter, for stepping up to serve. I have no questions to put forth at this time, and no concerns about you serving at all. I've met you once or twice, and I also served with Nancy on the planning and zoning, as well as on the Bayfront Park Committee. A great person. She would take pictures of some of our events, and yeah, she'll be missed. So sorry for your loss. And I hope you take care, and look forward to working with you as part of the Ethics Commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. And lastly, Derek.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Peter, it's been a privilege to get to know you over the years as well. You know, from our time jointly in Town Hall, both you and Nancy, I really held her in very high regard as well. And, you know, honestly, if you know, someone posed a question, who'd be the perfect person for the Ethics Commission in town, and you are at that top of the list. So thank you so much for allowing the mayor to pester you enough to volunteer. But we're really happy to have you on that commission, and we know you're going to do great things. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Council. And I really do appreciate your memories of Nancy. And Peter, thank you very much. Your portion of the meeting is over. If you want to beg off, we're good. And once again, thank you, Peter.
Okay, it's been my pleasure, Mr. Mayor.
Next, yes, thank you, Peter. Next, short-term rentals. As it says on the agenda, we're going to have an update from the town administrator, a presentation from Patrick Gonzalez of Gonzalez Media and Research. We'll take some time after that, after his presentation, for the council to ask questions, etc. And then we'll just discuss the process moving forward. So without further ado, Holly?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So short-term rentals has been a topic before the town pretty extensively over the last 6 months. However, short-term rentals, that the topic in terms of operating in the town, is not new to the town, and it's been discussed in the past. Our planning and zoning administrator, who is here with us this evening, Chris Jakubiak, has emphasized in public memorandums and meetings that the town has been consistent in its finding that short-term rentals are not permitted in residential zoning districts in the town. And in 2014, the Planning Commission reviewed this topic and decided that the zoning ordinance did not permit them and that no changes to the zoning ordinance were necessary. So to understand this further, the town did initiate a third-party professional poll through Gonzalez Media and Research, and Patrick Gonzalez is here this evening to provide an overview to the town council and public about his methodology on understanding this topic and the questions that were asked of the public. Just as an overview, the town requested that Gonzalez Media and Research break down the questions and response data so that we could understand the difference between HOA sections of town and non-HOA. And just to put that into perspective, the current registered rentals in town that we have logged now currently, 70% of those actually exist within non-HOA areas of town, and 30% of those are in the HOAs. In terms of our registered voters, we have about 80% of our town registered voters live in HOAs and 20% live in non-HOAs. So in terms of looking at responses and understanding this further for informational purposes, I've provided some research to town council in terms of the potential impacts to the housing in town that short-term rentals can have, just to review this and understand this further. And I've provided some cited resources in terms of how short-term rentals can, in fact, make it more difficult to access affordable housing and can shift properties from serving local residents to serving travelers, which in essence can hurt our local residents by raising housing costs. So with that information that I've provided, I will turn it over to Patrick Gonzalez, and at the end we'll finalize with a recommendation.
Excuse me. Thank you, Holly, and
Holly,
thank you, Mr.
and welcome, Patrick.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure that my audio is working well.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'd like to begin by expressing my appreciation for the opportunity to, excuse me, not only conduct the poll, but also present the findings tonight. My mother brought us to Annapolis many, many years ago. I'm not born in Maryland, but pretty close, and spent a large part of my life here around Annapolis. And Chesapeake Beach has always been a very enjoyable place for me and my family to visit. My wife works for State Highway, so she's been kind of actively involved in some of the construction projects that have been going on there for a while. And my daughters like taking her kids to the water park. So I have a fond place. Anyway, Gonzalez Research has been conducting polls in Maryland for several decades. I don't want to say how many years because that'll just age me even more. And during that time, We polled in every county in the state, over 90% of the legislative districts in nearly every major city and town in the state, including Chesapeake Beach. In constructing this poll, when we first started, we wanted to try to explore the issue of short-term rentals with a little bit of depth and nuance, not just simply yes, no, black, white, because few things in life are simply black or white. There's always a shading. We began the survey by asking residents of Chesapeake Beach, how would you rate the overall quality of life? Excellent, pretty good, only fair, or poor? And what we found was that 97% of residents say that the quality of life in Chesapeake Beach is either excellent, 52%, or good, 45%. I'm not sure there was a response. There was one respondent that said poor. Now, to give that a little bit of context, we did a poll in a rather prosperous county in Maryland a couple of months ago, and the quality of life there was about 85, 86% excellent good. So the residents of Chesapeake Beach like their town and like their quality of life. We then asked a series of 4 questions, kind of getting at the issue, beginning to get the issue of short-term rentals. And they were framed as an agree or disagree. And we rotated the order of the questions so that there wasn't any kind of built-in bias that you ask one question and go to the next question and so forth. And what we found first was that 91% of Chesapeake Beach residents agree that the town should emphasize the peace and quiet enjoyment of its residents. Now that 91% is comprised of 68% who strongly agree and 23% who somewhat agree. And there was just consistency among all subgroups, whether it was male, female, by age, whether it was HOA or non-HOA. We then read a statement and asked them to agree or disagree. Chesapeake Beach should be primarily a tourist destination first and a residential community second. 93% disagree with that statement. 67 strongly disagree, and 26% somewhat disagree. Again, there was no near unanimity of opinion by all groups. Again, including HOA and non-HOA. We then asked the question, I would prefer that homes surrounding me remain in residential use and not be used as short-term vacation rental housing. And with that, 69% agree. 45% strongly agree, 24% somewhat agree, while 30% disagree, 18% somewhat, 12% strongly disagree. Now here we found that there was a sharp distinction whether they were HOA or non-HOA. And I apologize because I'm referencing here. On that question again, 69% agree that they prefer that homes surrounding me remain in residential use, not be used as short-term vacation rental housing. 30% disagree overall. Among HOA residents, that number is 82% agreed. And among non-HOA, 58% disagreed. We then asked, read the statement, I would not mind living next to a short-term vacation rental property such as an Airbnb. An opinion was a little more split. 45% overall agreed that they wouldn't mind, 53% disagreed. But again, there was a sharp distinction. Those that live in the HOA community, substantial majority disagreed with that statement. Those that in a non-HOA agreed with it. We then approached, so we've got sort of this nuanced sort of degree of intensity on the questions. We then framed it as an either or. And we said, okay, which of the following statements comes closest to your point of view? Vacation stays by tourists to Chesapeake Beach are best suited to take place at a local hotel or inn, or vacation stays by tourists to Chesapeake Beach are best suited to take place at residential dwellings in town, which are rented out, such as an Airbnb. And thereby a greater than 2-to-1 margin, 66% said they're best suited to take place at a local hotel or inn. 31% said at a residential dwelling. And then finally, the last question of the survey was, and I'm going to just get through this, and then I want to open it up to questions. The question was, I prefer to reside in a residential community where homes are occupied by families that are not transient, or it would not bother me if my immediate neighbors rented their home to transient vacationers with different guests residing in the house every couple of days. And on that, 76% said family home, only 24% chose the transient vacationer option. So let me just kind of stop here and open it up to some questions.
Okay, if you will, Patrick, that's my job. Thank you, sir. So if you, just I really do appreciate your time, and I'm going to begin with the council vice. So I'm actually going to have some comments or questions as well, but I'm going to, as I always do, pretend we're at the dais and go around in order. And I'll begin with Council Vice President Derek Favre.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for being here tonight and going through your survey, your poll. I'd like to go back to a couple of the pages that you summarized, and then maybe dive into some of the data in the back. So if we could start on page 7. So the 2 questions that are listed on page 7, I would prefer that homes surrounding me remain in residential use and not be used as short-term rentals. As you pointed out, there was a disparity between HOAs and non-HOAs, conflicting each other with the different opinions. Same with the second question. They were marked difference in responses between HOAs and non-HOAs. But then, so with that in mind, moving to page 9. So it's 76% of citizens prefer to live in residential community where homes are occupied by families that are not transient. So, I mean, just on the surface, that percentage doesn't, I mean, it appears in conflict with the numbers on page 7. I understand, the summary percentages take in the whole town or the whole population sampled versus the broken down between HOAs and non-HOAs. But down below in that table, and the results indicated 56% to 43%. So even in this question, and I'm specifically looking at the non-HOA line, it leans more towards family occupied versus transient, but that conflicts with the numbers back on page 7, which I read those to be opposite. Well, first, I guess, clarify that I'm reading that correctly, but do you have any opinions on why those numbers seem to be in conflict?
Absolutely, yes, I do. And that gets to the original point that I tried to make about, we tried to get at this with some nuance, with some depth. And the question on page 7, and I apologize for turning away, but I got it in front of me on my computer. The question on it's an agree, disagree, but within the agree, disagree, there is strongly agree, somewhat disagree, and strongly disagree. On the strongly agrees, let me frame it this way. When you ask the question, when we ask, I would prefer that homes surrounding me remain in residential use and not be used as short-term vacation rental. Okay, that's one. And the other question, I would not mind living next to a short-term vacation rental property such as an Airbnb. What you find is on the extremes, on the strongly agrees and strongly disagree, 90% plus. 90% plus of those that strongly agree that I would prefer that my home surrounding me remain in residential use, disagree that I would not mind living next to a short-term vacation rental. But within the group of somewhat agree, you've got a quarter to a third saying, yeah, I somewhat agree. I would prefer that my home surrounding me remain in residential use. And I somewhat agree that I would not mind living next to a short-term vacation rental. It's not either or, it's not black or white. But when it's framed in terms of here are your two choices, which are the 76% back to page 9, here are your two choices, either family occupied or I prefer I prefer to reside in residential community where homes are occupied by families that are not transient, or it would not bother me if my immediate neighbors rented their homes. The 76% that chose the family home, there's no nuance. There's no shade. You got to pick one or the other. And so that's where what seems to be kind of a discrepancy among the even among non-HOA, it's kind of consistent. Have I explained that, or have I just jumbled it up?
Let's, if we could, and I pardon my consideration for my other colleagues, I just want to dive into this just a little bit. So so the question on page 7, I'm tracking the data, the agree or disagree answers, which is on page 15. And I see that clearly. But then if you turn over to page 16 so you mentioned somewhat agree, somewhat disagree. Is that reflective on page 16 for the same question? Because, for the page 7 question, which is I prefer that homes, surrounding me remain residential and not used as short-term rentals. That's an agree, disagree question, which is reflected on page 7. Is the intensity data on page 16, is that where I'm seeing the numbers that you're explaining?
Yes, I mean, the intensity is on page 16. The results from page 7 are off of page 15, where it was just simply agree, disagree.
Right. So I'm trying to draw a conclusion to this, and I'm having trouble distinguishing what the conclusion is, because again, it appears muddied. I understand that there's, with the intensity question, that's telling, but I'm trying to understand the data on page 9, and I'm just not finding it. So I'll reserve any further questions for now. If you can, I'll keep looking, but I just want to understand better that distinction with the non-HOAs.
And I want to help you as best I can to help you understand that. So again, I'm not sure I understand the questioning. I understand that you seem to see something that's not quite computing, and I want to try to
Yeah,
help
sure.
you.
So I guess, let me try it a different way. So on page 9, it said, it's telling me 56% of non-HOA residents prefer family occupied. But on the previous page, that corresponding number to me is only 40%, where it's larger in the disagree. So I'm just trying to, I guess, understand why there's a conflict there between those two numbers.
Well, the question on page 7, where 40% of the non-HOA
Mhm.
agree, the question is, I would prefer that homes surrounding me remain in residential use and not be used as short-term vacation rentals. That's 40% agree. Now that 40% agree, and I'm gonna run down to page 16 real quick. That 40% agree is comprised of 10.5% that strongly agree among non-HOA and 29% that somewhat agree. And what I'm trying to convey is that so 40% among non-HOA agree, but only 10% strongly agree. Among the 29% that somewhat agree with that statement, obviously chose family homes over transient vacationers. They don't agree with it enough to, I would venture to guess that out of the 10% of non-HOA that strongly agree with that statement, they all said preferred transit vacationers. But among those who somewhat agree, they, given the choice, and that's again where the nuance comes in, where the sort of intensity of opinion, intensity of feeling. If they're given a choice, yeah, I somewhat agree that I prefer that it was residential only, but chose chose the family home when when having the dichotomy of either this or this. So.
Right. So, well, out of respect for my colleagues, I'm going to go ahead and stop here and let them ask questions, and perhaps some more of this will be shed light on by their questions as well. But thank you for doing this survey, Patrick.
Okay. Thank you, Derek. Keith?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Patrick, for being here today and explaining these results somewhat. A couple questions. One is, how did you differentiate, or how did you select your sample pools from HOAs and non-HOAs? Was that an artifact of just the selection process, or did you specifically identify them ahead of time? The two
All
groups?
streets beforehand were identified, working in concert with the town as either HOA or non-HOA. So they were coded beforehand.
Okay. And then you, from that, you took a selection out of each of those two groups. Is that how that worked?
Yeah, roughly 2/3 of the town on the same was HOA, and 1/3 was non-HOA, and that's how we balanced it in the survey.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I was just curious what the process was on that. And then in developing the questions, how are the questions developed?
In concert with Holly and the group there, we worked together, and that's how we got them.
And how do you make the determination? I'm not real familiar with surveys. A couple things that I've understand with surveys is it's all about how you ask the question, right? And the kind of thing. And I think that's where Derek was struggling. And I think probably all of us are struggling with a little bit when you have these different questions and the results are slightly different in this case. And I think I understood what you were trying to say is that once people had to kind of put their money where their mouth was, and you said, okay, it's this or this, instead of there you have 4 choices, you have 2 choices, which one is it? Some of those who were kind of slightly were like, well, okay, when you put it this way, I'm not going to choose that. I want a residential house next to me, kind of deal. But so I was just kind of curious, how do you determine how many questions are needed to kind of really feel like you have a good representation of
Well,
the
I
issue?
think that we all kind of in concert felt that, okay, first of all, we were limited by budget. So there was a limited number of questions we could ask. And just working back and forth, I think we were comfortable that the number of questions was suited to what we needed. And I felt comfortable that the questions were getting, again, in different ways at the issue. And again, so often in life, we want to frame things as it's this way or that way. And it just isn't so. And so consequently, but what you want to do, it's not mushy. Life's not mushy either. And data, certainly, the whole purpose of conducting survey research is to get kind of a handle on the issue. And so as a balance, I was pretty comfortable that this.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah, and I was also curious about the word choice. It's especially that last one where it says transient vacationers. Transient to me kind of has a little bit of a negative connotation often. And I was just curious how you all made the word choice selections. Or it's just, again, committee, you guys were just talked about it. And
Well, I mean, I wouldn't slough it off that easily. No, I was comfortable with at the end, and I hear what you're saying, and but no, I was comfortable with it. But I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. That's all the questions I have for right now.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Keith. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, welcome, Mr. Gonzalez, to the town of Chesapeake Beach.
Thank you.
I don't have too many questions. My colleagues are asking some good questions. You're probably aware that there's been a tremendous outreach push from Town Hall regarding this matter, and it's been a long time. We've spent a lot of time and resources, I think, on outreach with this. Has your firm been involved with this sort of specific polling regarding short-term rentals before?
Well, certainly not in Chesapeake Beach. I'm trying to think. Over the years, nothing specifically on short-term rental is jumping up. Have we done similar type questions in other areas of the state? Yeah, I think we have.
I'm certainly not doubting your qualifications in any capacity.
No,
You've got a laundry list and a lifetime, frankly, of conducting polls. I appreciate the efforts that you brought to the town. Your results, we already know. I mean, the answers that you brought, we've frankly reinforced what we already know about this matter in town. And I appreciate you. Thank you for that.
Well, yeah, and I think to me, the one thing that was most pronounced about the poll results was that distinction between the HOA and the non-HOA.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you. I have no additional comments or questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Before I go to Larry, I'm going to pretend I'm in the middle of the dais and have Patrick, maybe it's a question or comments for you, sir. First thing is, when I look at the overall findings, we 93% disagree with the statement Chesapeake Beach should primarily be a tourist destination first and a residential community second. I just want to know for the record, we've been hearing the opposite from out of town investors that have been, supporting their, I guess what at the time is still an illegal commercial operation. But the point is that while we're hearing from out-of-town investors that this should be a tourist town and tourism should go first, actually 93% of the people in the town of Chesapeake Beach said no, they don't believe that. So 93 is a huge number. When I look at 69% agree with the statement, I would prefer the homes surrounding me remain in residential use, not short-term rental housing. By greater than a 2-to-1 margin, 66% of the residents believe that vacation stays in town should take place at a hotel that are better suited for this. I see that, 3/4 of the people polled prefer to live in a residential community where their homes are occupied by families and not the short-term rentals. These numbers, which are always around 70%, it kind of reminds me of a couple things. One is the referendum that the town just went through on expanded gambling, where each question had over 70% of the population, preferred to retain small town charm and not expanded gambling. And, quite frankly, it mirrors the results of the mayor race that we had, where two candidates had a platform of pro short-term rental, and they only gleaned 29% of the total vote. And the winner of the election, me, basically, who took the other position on short-term rentals, I gleaned 71% of the vote. So what I'm seeing is is a rather clear picture from the people who live in Chesapeake Beach. So and I just thought it was it has been more than a coincidence that the what we just heard in our last election mirrors what the poll is gleaning. So that's just that's my comment. Thank you for your work, Patrick, and I'll move on to Larry.
Thank you. And thank you, Patrick, for your efforts. I've been sort of peripherally involved in doing surveys like this, and I know how difficult they can be and how careful you have to be in choosing the language of the questions. Sort of building on a couple of earlier comments, just to confirm, I understand there were 275 residents were included in this survey, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And earlier we talked about of the town, about 2/3 of the residents live in HOAs and 1/3 are in non-HOAs. Would it be fair to say of that 275, it's about that same percentage?
Yeah, on page, that's on page 21.
Okay. Yep, got it. Thank you. Sort of building on a couple things, we've known all along that the majority of the residences within the town are located within HOAs. And several months ago, we did some informal checking with HOAs, and it's my understanding that certainly the vast majority, if not all, of our current HOAs prohibit short-term rentals right now. So, at that point, we're looking at, 2/3 of the town would be excluded from having short-term rentals, even if they were to be approved by the town. What I found fascinating in the results is the responses to several of the questions just shocked me. For instance, the question on residential use only. Yes, 82% of the HOA residents agree with that. But 58% of the non-HOAs, those that would be probably most impacted if short-term rentals were to be allowed in town, 58% disagreed with it. And then the next question, wouldn't mind living next to a short-term rental. Not surprising, 67% of HOAs disagree. However, 73% of non-HOAs agree. These are the people that would be most likely directly impacted if short-term rentals were allowed in the town. And then I just noted the same thing about the word transient, that I just find it interesting that the non-HOA residents who would most likely be impacted by the short-term rentals do not seem to be as strongly opposed to them as those in the HOAs who probably wouldn't see them anyway because their HOA prohibits them. So that's basically my comments, and thank you for your efforts.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Larry. Next, Charlie.
I have a couple questions, but mainly for us as a body. I guess one statement that I make up front that I found very little surprising in this survey, in these survey results, except what I think it was Larry pointed out, which is that 93%, or I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, it was you, 93% of the residents do not think of Chesapeake Beach as a resort town. And I think that's a very interesting, a very interesting finding that tells us that our residents think of it as a small town they call home and not necessarily a resort town. So that I find educational. These results seem to me to be in conflict, even with Larry's kind of parsing of the HOA versus non-HOA, which takes a little bit of the lopsidedness out of some of these big numbers, 90% this and 80% that it seems to take some of the lopsidedness out of that, but it's definitely in conflict with a very vocal group of supporters who favor short-term rentals. And I think one question that we have to ask ourselves is, are we comfortable that vocal group of supporters truly represents a minority, or they were not properly represented in this survey? I think that's a very important question that we need to consider. And I guess the last comment that I have, or last question that I have, is what will the town do? What will we do to promote, to publish the results of these findings in a way that's very proactive, so that people know what these data show, more than just having them in tonight's agenda, which I'm sure a lot of people looked at, but I'm sure others did not. Because I think those vocal supporters and others should see these data so that they can either respond to them or at least understand what these data show and how they conflict with what these vocal supporters have offered in their arguments. So I think that's really the limit of what I have to offer at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. I will answer that one question for you. The town administrator, plans to release all this to the public as soon as the meeting's over. So it'll be out there. Valerie.
Hi, yes, and first, thank you for doing the survey. I really enjoyed reading it. Full disclosure, I work for the U.S. Census Bureau.
Oh.
So let's talk a little bit about your survey frame, if I may. You stratified it by age, gender, and HOA versus non-HOA. The one thing I think that might be missing is, did you stratify it by a renter, long-term renter, registered voter, and a homeowner who it's their primary residence?
No, the only demographics we included were those that are in the report.
Because I think that whether the respondent was a homeowner who it's their primary residence versus a renter, those nuanced results might show some interesting information, whether that renter is in an HOA or a non-HOA. When you got to your stratified sample, how did you pick the phone numbers in which to call? Was it random selection?
It was just randomly selected, yes.
Okay. And did you try them once or multiple times, or just go to the next randomly selected caller?
We ultimately, to collect 275 interviews, you've got to go back. So we would try to get a respondent until it was either we reach 275 and with a balanced sample, or we got a hard refusal. No, we don't want to participate in the survey.
Working for the census every 10 years, I totally get it. You can only call back so many times.
Yes.
So your goal is to reach approximately 5% of the population?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
No, that's, I mean, I did the math and that seems to be a goal. It's about 5%. And so your respondents were 86 for non-HOA and 188 for HOA. Okay. Which matches our demographics of where folks live in town. One thing I'll point out, I didn't really have any questions except really for that whether the respondent was a renter or a homeowner where it's their primary residence. I think everyone else answered the questions, but what I will point out is that really think about a town. We have 90% of the residents that rate our quality of life as excellent or good. We should feel blessed. That's an amazing response. And 93% where we feel like we're a residential community as opposed to a tourist destination. And even taking in the your error rate, which was 6%, right? Plus or minus. 6% plus or minus. And it's a pretty small sample, so 275. It's not a large sample. That's a pretty good statistic to look at. Is just how good people feel about the town that they live in, and I think that that's interesting. Other than that, I'll look through it. If I have any real, I have read it. If I really have any questions on the numbers, I'll provide them to Holly. And without a problem. But yeah, next time you do something like this, I think people that are homeowners, where it's their primary residence, may be more vested in their community than a long-term renter. And so if you knew the difference between that, that might add more nuance to your data, and you might see some real statistical differences.
I agree with you. In hindsight, we had it focused on the HOA versus non-HOA, but in hindsight, and I've reflected on this a little in the past month, I wish I had suggested including a do you rent or own question.
That I think you might also get more nuance if you had children versus no children.
Yeah.
But if you referencing that, I think you might get a little nuance there also. I don't think it's any real secret how I feel. I live in a non-HOA area, and I look forward to the discussion on the impacts that short-term rentals have on the fabric of a neighborhood. And so thank you for your time. And like I said, if I have any questions, I'll forward them to Holly, but residents of Chesapeake Beach should be feeling pretty good about how happy people are to live here.
Yes, they should.
We are lucky. Don't lose sight of that.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Valerie. Does the council have any questions of Patrick before we let him go? I'm gonna see if anybody wants to get one last shot at Patrick, and then we'll let him call it a night. Hearing none. Thank you, Patrick, and have a good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Patrick.
Elizabeth. Hey, Elizabeth.
There we go. We'll let Patrick get out of there. Okay, next, Chris Jakubiak is going to address process moving forward. Is Chris on the call?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm here.
Okay. So you've been in the meeting paying attention. I'll give you the microphone, sir.
Okay. Well, back in March, I prepared a memo following the Planning Commission's previous discussions on the topic. And when they received the memo, rather than actually acting to study the issue any further, they decided that they needed to focus on the comprehensive plan. As you recall, that because of the moratorium and the desire to get the plan done is as quickly as possible. The commission said, we just can't do justice to this topic in the near term. And they didn't submit a recommendation to you, as you know. Instead, they forwarded the memorandum, the March 13th memorandum that I wrote as their response to your request that they look at the matter. I think they also recognize that this is a topic that needed a little more deliberation and coordination with any potential property owners that could be affected. And because different areas could be affected differently, they wanted to go through a more systematic approach. So I think that option is still available to the town and to the planning commission. And I'm pretty certain that they want to take this up, or would agree to take it up in more detail once we get the comprehensive plan done and forwarded to you for your approval.
Okay, thank you. And I'll begin with Dr. Bodine this round to see if we have any questions of Chris.
Just to be clear, currently, are short-term rentals legal in Chesapeake Beach?
Are they permitted in Chesapeake Beach? Are they allowed?
Are they legal in Chesapeake Beach, and if so, where?
They're not allowed in Chesapeake Beach. The table of permitted uses lists every use that's allowed in every zoning district, and this use is not allowed. There are accommodations types of uses, hotels, motels, tourist homes, and they are allowed in commercial maritime zones, and bed and breakfasts, which are very distinct conditional type of use. It's allowed in the residential zone, but the short-term rental use is not permitted.
Has it ever been permitted?
I don't know that it's ever been permitted. It may have been permitted before zoning took place, but as far as I know, the use has not been permitted, at least in 20 years. Going back beyond that, I don't know. I doubt it. I think that when the town wrote the zoning ordinance, they decided that this was a use that no longer ought to be in residential areas.
You mentioned, I think, or someone did, that this topic was reviewed in planning and zoning in 2014. Do you know how or why that topic was brought up in 2014?
Yeah, in 2014, I was involved in a code enforcement matter. Some family was complaining about the neighbors using their property for short-term rentals, and that there were, a variety of vacationers, interfering presumably with their backyard and their lifestyle, how they intended to use their garden and the like. And so I looked into the matter, and I made a determination that it wasn't permitted. And the homeowner that was doing this short-term rental was very accommodating, friendly, was a really great kind of community spirited guy. And he said, okay, you're right, I won't do it anymore. And he stopped doing the use. And I think he actually sold the house. But that made me think, maybe I ought to bring this to the attention of the planning commission and deal with it in a systematic way. And I did. Jeff LaBar was the chairman at the time, and I brought it to the planning commission, and the commission just didn't want to take it up. And they said, this is not something that we'd like to advance any changes on, leave things as they are. They understood to be that it's not allowed.
If you know, and I think we've discussed this before, how many residential units are in Chesapeake Beach? And of those residential units, how many are homeowners versus renters?
There are about 2,200 occupied households, and roughly 500 are rental units, 5 to 550 rental units.
Yes, that's quite a bit difference from like, if you look at North Beach, which I think they have a substantial larger percentage of their housing stock that's actually rentals. So that's really all the questions I have for you, Chris. I have comments about short-term rentals themselves and Airbnbs and such and their appropriateness in Chesapeake Beach, but I think you've answered the questions that I had from a planning and zoning administrative perspective, and thank you. Good job.
Thank you, Valerie. Charlie, any questions of Chris?
Chris, if you have this information, I would like it. If you don't, maybe we can get it after the meeting. You cited at least 2 other models where something that looks like short-term rentals would be permitted, bed and breakfasts and some sort of use for homes in maritime zone districts. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's right.
Do you have any information on the number of potential units that would fall into that category to be able to use their properties as a bed and breakfast or as a short-term rental as permitted by that? I don't want to say loophole because that it's not, but it's, you know, if it looks and smells like a short-term rental, that's what it is. And I think that if we don't look at that, we're not looking at the issue holistically.
The bed and breakfasts would be limited to single-family detached residences in non-HOA parts of the community. So right away, we're down below 25% of the housing stock based on what we learned today. The tourist homes are allowed in the commercial zones and in the residential zones, but there are only about 7 single-family houses, maybe 5, that are zoned commercial, that are in residential use. You know, so there's only that many. There's only a few places that can be converted readily into a tourist home. A tourist home is not a short-term rental, and the real difference is that if you go into a tourist home, you might find that there are a number of different people you don't know also renting a room in the tourist home, you know. But with a short-term rental, we know it's the rental of the unit as a whole, the entire dwelling unit. There are some other issues, there are differences, but that's the principal difference.
And it really, if you divide that out one more time by the number of homes that actually would make sense based on their location as a short-term rental type of property, you're down to even a smaller number. We're probably down to 25, 30 homes, maybe not even that many. That's subjective. I recognize that.
But you're saying 25 to 30 homes that would be allowed to be converted to a short-term rental?
No, that would actually be marketable once you figure out all the what's legal and divide it one more time or take out one more time properties that are practical for that use. You would have a market desire for that use. You're down to, I got to believe you're down to 20 homes.
Perhaps I would imagine if I were wanting to do a short-term rental, I'd want to visit a place that had a nice view of the water or was within walking distance of the water or some other recreational venue. Of course, not every single family home in the non-HOA area is like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, almost any place in town, though, does get you within walking distance, as you know, to the trail, roughly to the trail, to the, you know, rod and reel, to various gaming venues, to the restaurants. So there's some level of tourism amenities that could be obtained within walking distance. You only have to think of, say, Rehoboth Beach. You see Rehoboth Beach, there are a variety of tourist homes that are located some distance from the ocean. And I was always startled by that, you know, the entire town really is subject to that use. You could pretty much rent the place out anywhere and walk to the beach. So it's just a great place to be. So you don't mind not being right on the water.
Yeah, it's good. That's a good point. And that is subjective. That is subjective measure anyway. So
Clearly.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you for your time tonight. Learned a couple things as always.
Thank you, Charlie. Larry.
Thank you. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Just to clarify, my understanding, the next steps, since we're in the process moving forward item here, is basically this is going to get referred back to planning and zoning. Is that correct?
I don't know. Gather that's up to the
Okay.
mayor and
Okay.
council.
Well, I'll defer to the mayor when the time comes. Thank you, Chris.
Sure.
Okay, and I'm gonna, Chris, I'm gonna ultimately end what I'm gonna say with a question. You can tell me whether you think it's valid or not. One of the things I keep hearing over and over again about this whole issue about, de-emphasizing, long-term, rentals, long-term, residents, de-emphasizing the robust character of our neighborhoods, with short-term rentals is the ill effects of de-emphasizing long-term rentals is, there's an economic effect. In other words, you have to really be careful what you ask for sometimes, because, and you tell me if you agree or not, it's the year-round residents that support our businesses. I mean, all of our businesses, albeit, Rollins, or I can see the places I go to all the time, Rollins, or, CVS, the bank, local restaurants, our barbershop. In fact, I remember when I moved here, the big thing about a new business was, will they survive the winter? And it's the year-round residents who support these businesses year-round, not just a seasonal, be it a spike or whatever. So in terms of that economic impact, what's your thoughts as a town planner? Short-term tourism versus robust residential neighborhood year-round.
Yeah, that's a
Supporting
great
our businesses.
observation. So when you think about economic development, you might say, well, it's good for economic development that we have more short-term rentals, because there are people that would otherwise not stay in a hotel that will stay in a single-family house, and they'll go to the gaming venues and the restaurants and the bars, and they'll spend money. Okay. But you have to think about the others. First of all, we don't know that all of them wouldn't have otherwise stayed in a hotel, first of all. But you have to think about what is displaced, or what is the opportunity cost to a town when a land use is changed. And changing from a single family home or any accommodation, any home, to another use, short-term rental, changes things. You don't have then a family that's living there, as you say, year round, that supports all the basic businesses that the community needs year round. So that same family might support the restaurants and the bars and the gaming venues and the grocery store and the beer and wine store and the dry cleaner and the pizza place and the delivery guys and the doctors and everything else. And that's at its heart what economic development is. And we consolidate a strong, vibrant residential community. There's not much of a, you can't say much more than that. You've got economic development when you do that. So I guess I'm suggesting that it's not an all or nothing. You can't simply say that economic development is aligned with short-term rentals. It's not the case at all. Tourism, that slither of the town's economic development, may be aligned with short-term rentals, but economic development in the broader sense of a community, not so much.
Okay, thank you. You answered my question, sir. I'll go to Mr. Morris.
I don't think I have any questions for Mr. DeKubiak. There isn't anything new here. I do have a question for you, Mr. Mayor, if I may ask. Are these our final comments on this matter this evening, or will there be another round?
No. No. I plan to go another round. That's
Okay.
correct.
I'm sorry?
I plan to go another round.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have any questions for Mr. Jakubiec. I said there isn't anything new here for me. Thank you.
All righty. Keith?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I have no additional questions. Thank you.
All right. And lastly, Derek?
Yeah, thank you. So, Chris, I want to go back to some of the definition you were talking about before regarding tourist home versus a B&B versus a vacation rental. And to me, especially the way you explained the tourist home tonight, that seems very a subtle distinction between what would be considered a tourist home versus a vacation rental. And what I gleaned from what you said was really the only difference is a tourist home, there's multiple families in theory, could be multiple families sharing a home versus a single family or a group occupying one home. So in our case, you know, like you mentioned, tourist homes are approved in certain areas, but vacation rentals are not. I mean, why would there be a distinction between a home that's available to, you know, different families sharing it as a tourist home versus a vacation rental, which in theory could be used the same way, but also in a different way? Why would there be a distinction, and why should there be?
Yeah. Okay. So first, there's another distinction too, beyond how the house is programmed, you know, for multiple vacationers or just one. With a short-term rental, presumably, when short-term renting is over with, the house can go back to the single-family market. With a tourist home, because of the divisions you have to do within the house to accommodate life safety standards for multiple accommodations, you've almost changed the structure into a mini hotel, right? So there's that distinction as well. The tourist home clearly has a possibility of having urban kind of commercial impacts, parking demand, signage, people, multiple, you know, parties congregating outside, you know, just like you would at a small scale hotel. So that's why that particular use is relegated to the commercial districts. I'm pretty certain of that. I wasn't here when that was written, but I would imagine that's why. The short-term rentals are really what used to be called vacation homes. You know, they were marketed in different way, but they're basically the same. Someone leaves the keys with somebody and you spend the weekend there. Maybe someone manages it and takes care of it. But you know, that use of land predates zoning. And from in the 60s and early 70s, even early, I should say up until the 60s, I would imagine there were many vacation homes all throughout Chesapeake Beach. My parents had their honeymoon in Chesapeake Beach in 1964, and I bet they stayed at a vacation rental. And so it's, you know, it was one of those things. But when the town adopted a zoning ordinance, it wrote the purpose statements for residential areas to make them clearly residential. And that theme has run over many decades, that a single family neighborhood is residential, that we've had our run of, you know, vibrant, active tourist location. And that didn't always serve the community well, as I understand from talking to people over the years in the 60s and 70s. It was only when they really got a hold of the purposes of zoning and began enforcing a single family neighborhood, kind of exclusive residential type of area, did the town start growing and become a vibrant community again. But it shifted from a tourism economy to what we have today, which is clearly residential. There's no doubt about it. So, you know, the distinction is just based on changes in economics and changes in land use policy, perhaps a reaction to how things used to be.
Okay. Well, and let me, actually, that's a good segue to my other question about subtle distinctions. You mentioned, 20 years ago or so when the code was initially written, bed and breakfasts were, I think more commonplace, more prevalent in that time than vacation rentals, or certainly short-term rentals was not a term that we used 20 years ago that I'm aware of, but bed and breakfast was pretty commonplace. So kind of moving forward, in the evolution of our society, if you will, a bed and breakfast, obviously the distinction being that the owner is on premises, and rents a portion of their home. What are your opinions on, a short-term rental functioning similarly if the owner was a neighbor or a resident of the town? Not, and I don't mean like a management company, based in another city, but it was an owner operator who may be, the house next door or across the street or, a couple blocks away. It was a resident of the town. Do you see any parallel between, the older structure of a bed and breakfast and how that's evolved versus a nuance like that, where a resident, what if it was myself, for instance, and I owned another property and I rented it out? Is there any parallel to that, or is that still in your mind still quite distinct? As the two different situations have evolved over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, the way they've evolved is that the bed and breakfast comes with a whole set of regulations that are intended to minimize the impact of the use. So there are regulations on parking. There's regulations that ensure the owner or a licensed agent is there. There's a condition that the unit be licensed on the bed and breakfast registry. There's the condition that breakfast be served. I mean, by definition, there has to be that sort of level of service delivered to the customers. And what we've, in working with the county building permit staff, have come to understand is that a building inspection is necessary for basic life safety. So if someone is going to be accommodated in that bed and breakfast, they have an assurance that there's fire exit, that the halls are wide enough, that there's not storage blocking the way, so there's that basic life safety review that the county does for bed and breakfasts. And we have two in town, or at least we have one that's operating. One, I don't know that they've actually started yet, but from a zoning standpoint, I approved it. They still needed to meet with the county and get their inspection. So the short-term rental, in many respects, is like a bed and breakfast. And if a owner opted to meet the basic standards that deal with those issues of parking and impact and safe operation and good neighborliness, then it would almost be indistinguishable, right? It would be managed in that way. Absent those sets of standards, you don't have you have free reign. You have parking overflowing onto the street. You have lots that are houses that are too close to each other, which actually create burdens on neighboring properties and all the like. So the bed and breakfast standards are intended to buffer and minimize impacts, mitigate impacts. And they don't attend to any short-term rental use.
Right. So, set of criteria similar to a bed and breakfast, I guess with the difference of the nuance being the owner of the property is on premises versus not. I mean, other than that, there's there's a scenario where, similar criteria and inspections and everything else could be put in place that would mimic a bed and breakfast, short of the the owner operator and serving breakfast.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. I mean, if a short-term rental hits all the right buttons, it becomes a bed and breakfast, as our code allows. I mean, it becomes an approved bed and breakfast, and that's what the zoning ordinance allows. So it's an allowable use if you do it right. But that's not the model right now for short-term rentals. But it could
Right.
be. It could be.
Right. Yeah. And there's opportunity for someone to potentially think outside the box and use their property in a way that's permitted as a bed and breakfast.
That's exactly what the second applicant that I was referring to did. When presented with a code enforcement letter, this person said, isn't there anything I can do? And he was advised that he could become a bed and breakfast if he met the standards. And he met the standards, submitted a plan to me, agreed to meet all the conditions, and we issued a zoning permit for him to be a bed and breakfast. So he decided that it was worth his time to comply with the town zoning regulations.
So I guess one other just very subtle distinction. Does the code require that the owner operator live at that dwelling, meaning they must stay the night there as well? Or I guess what's the distinction with the bed and breakfast? Do they have to sleep in the same house at the same time? Where's the line drawn?
It'll take me just a minute to answer that question for certain. I can't recall. I don't think the owner has to be there, but I think certainly a manager does. And I believe the manager has to be on premises, but
At the same time,
I
during
forgot.
occupancy.
Yeah, let me just check on that. Quick. Okay, I'm reading the right section now. And okay. The owner or manager lives on the premises. That's the standard.
Okay, good. No, thank you. I apologize for peeling the onion back on some of these very subtle things, but I think it's good for everyone to hear it again.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kis. Before I wrap this up, I want to conclude by referring the council back to the recommendation portion of the town administrator's report, if you will. Basically, I don't know if we're going to bring it up or not, but we can wait. Okay. What we're talking about here, is it's pretty monumental, and it's a land use change. And as noted per section 290-31 of the town code, it clearly outlines that, this would have to go back to planning and zoning at its best. So it seems to me that what I need to do is to contact the chair of that board and ask that they go ahead and, do this after they complete the comprehensive plan, to ensure, as it says, further public outreach, et cetera. So so having said that, that's my interpretation and desire, but I certainly want to hear from council. So I'll start off with the vice president. Derek?
So are you asking us to take a straw poll? Is that
No, no, I'm just asking what your opinion is on that.
Mr. Mayor, could I jump in there real quick too?
You can, sir.
It's one of these things where, I've looked over the zoning ordinance a number of times and I can tell you Chesapeake Beach is unique and I can tell you it has a quirk about the planning commission. In that, generally what you find in most municipalities is that the council is the most powerful and the authority with regard to any type of matters with regard to a municipality. What's interesting about Chesapeake Beach is that you really delegated a lot of anything dealing with zoning or development to the planning commission. Okay, and really, I just wanted to bring your attention to section 290-31. Okay, which is basically the section of the planning commission. And it said, and I've looked at this a number of times, but it says the planning commission shall advise the town council on all matters relating to the orderly growth of Chesapeake Beach. And I said, I've read it a number of times about the authority and delegations of how that works, but it says, shall advise the town council on all matters. And in reviewing that, it seems to me that anytime you've got a zoning matter, really, they have to give you advice to make a decision and help you. Oh, there it is right there, okay. It says right there, the purpose of the planning commission shall advise the town council on all matters related to the orderly growth of the Chesapeake Beach. And so by logic, in order for them to advise, they must have, it has to go before them before it goes to the town council. That's the way I'm looking at it that way. And then what's interesting is, I would almost have expected it to say that the town council can refer, or may refer to the planning commission to get advice or some consent, or the town council may get others' opinions from the planning commission at its discretion. But it didn't, this one didn't say that. It said shall advise the town council on all matters. And in reading that, for some reason, whoever drafted this wanted the town council to have some type of input from the planning commission with regard to these matters. And so really, that really gives the planning commission a great deal of authority. And to me, they have to, according to that wording right there, it says that the planning commission must review it to advise the town council. Obviously, it's the town council is going to make the ultimate decision, but according to my reading of that, the council can't make the decision without getting the advice of the planning commission because it says on all matters. So that's a quirk that is Chesapeake Beach. And Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to give you kind of an interpretation or a reminder of that particular section of how I'm reading. If somebody else is reading it different, then I welcome that interpretation also.
Okay. Thank you, Todd. Yeah, and so Derek, I'll just step back and just say, in order to comply with with the laws of the town of Chesapeake Beach, it's my intention to refer this matter back to the chair of the planning board and discuss with him the viability of when indeed for them to attack this issue, which I assume would be best after they complete.
Mr. Mayor, let me ask.
Having said that,
yeah, if I could ask,
if you will, sir.
Yes, thank you. So let me ask a question then, based on our attorney's interpretation. So they did review this already, and they voted to send forth Chris's memo as the guidance or their advice to us. As Chris explained, I guess they chose not to deliberate further, but they did send that. So does that suffice as the guidance required, by this code from the Planning Commission? And I guess because my position is I think we need to continue to deliberate on this at our level for the time being. And as I interpret what I read and what you said, Todd, is they've already provided their advice, or at least one level of it, to meet this requirement in the code. Do you see it that way as well, or no?
Speaking to me, or
Yes, please.
I haven't seen what the planning commission sent to you. What is it that they sent? I mean, was it, and the other part of it is shall advise, and advise is sort of a, undefined term as to exactly what that is, or the degree of advice that you could want or need, or
Right.
or anything else. But to answer your question directly, I don't know what they sent to you. And wasn't there an issue also regarding the resignation of one of the planning commission members? I'm not sure. I don't know the facts of that either, though.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not going to speak to.
I think Chris can answer that question in terms of what the planning board did. Are you still on the call, Chris?
Yes. So, candidly, I think the planning commission punted on this, and they punted it back to you because they just didn't have the time or resources to study this any further. It wasn't, not at all suggesting they didn't want to, but given overriding concerns about the comprehensive plan, they just couldn't do it. And I think they are honestly of the opinion that in order to do this right, they need to engage with the community. And it's hard to imagine a public involvement process at the same time of doing the comprehensive plan too. So.
All right, well, so I still have
Thank
the
you,
floor.
Chris.
So I guess, and what I want to say, and I'm going to speak generally, our town is not created equally. And, the results of the survey that was done, that was described today, certainly confirms this. There are clearly areas in town where short-term rentals are not practical. There are other areas where I think they may have some potential. I think, I said a few minutes ago, I think we need to continue to deliberate. Personally, I don't, if we punt this back to planning and zoning right now, it's going to sit for a while, and there's deliberation opportunity lost if we do that. I think we should continue to deliberate on this, and I think frankly amongst the council members, we need to determine if everything that we've learned so far, do we have the appetite to continue deliberating, or some other path forward. So that's I'm clearly in the area that we need to continue to deliberate, but I respect my colleagues' points of view and their wishes, and I will leave my statement at that.
Thank
Mr.
you,
Mayor, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor,
Yes.
if I could ask Chris, if you could send me, because I think it's important for council to know for sure exactly where everybody is in the process. And I'm going to ask if Chris could send me exactly what the planning commission did or did not do, and so I can give an opinion to make sure that where we are right here, right now, can be fairly established, that there's an understanding that whether some type of advice was given or not given, or punted, or whatever. Chris, could I ask you to get that and send it over to me, please, so I can properly tell the council for sure where they are right now, at least what I think.
Yes, just take me a moment.
No, don't do it right now. Don't do it right now, but just send it
Okay.
over to me so I can take a look at it tomorrow, because I wouldn't give an opinion right here, right now.
Okay.
And if I can, when you do that, Todd, we could very well take that up in our next work session in response to Councilman Favre talking about, deliberating. We can look at what you send us, Todd, and, take it up in our next work session if we, but,
I'll have it to you as quick as I can.
okay. Keith.
So thank you. I'm a little bit, I guess I'm wondering what the question is at this point. Are we still wanting to give opinions on this without Todd's final say, or what is it that you're seeking at this point?
Well, I guess if you want to give an opinion without Todd's final, that's okay. But yeah, I see what you're saying. You just as soon hear from Todd before you say anything further.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
I would probably say the same thing if I was sitting in your chair, but all right, thank you. But I still want to go let everybody and the council have one last say at this. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wow, this has been an arduous road. It's certainly been more arduous than it needed to be. And the recommendation of kicking this down the road, which could end up being another 6 months, is irresponsible. To me, that's council and the mayor not doing their job. I do appreciate more and more outreach with the community. To the attorney's comment, shall advise, that's in support of council decisions because the mayor and town council are responsible for all matters pertaining to the town. And planning and zoning is going to write and devise code based on what council leads and decides. They're working on a comprehensive plan right now that we may not agree, and we may kick back certain parts of that. And that's council prerogative and mayor prerogative, us as a group, as a cohesive group. I'm certainly not afraid of losing any votes, but I think it's important that council vote on this matter now. I don't even think we're talking about code. We're talking about whether or not we want to allow short-term rentals, which that word is not in our code. Whether we want to allow them or not in any capacity. If it's voted down, obviously there's code that needs to be strengthened, and short-term rental verbiage absolutely needs to be part of that. And if this body decides that, I'm on board with that. Planning and zoning voted to send this matter to council. They sent us a lot of information. I don't want to forget, especially if this gets kicked down 6 months from now, all of the past work that the town and the people that have been involved have been put into this up to this point. Somebody's bringing up a planning and zoning chair that's, 5-6 years ago. Nobody's talking about the former chair and what his opinions were. He wrote a pretty concise letter regarding his opinion on that. We should be voting on this now, and it should be if we want to allow them in any capacity or not. And because we're not talking about regulations, that's very discouraging for me, and that's very telling for me that this matter is being led to die in committee, if you will. There have been some great ideas that are worth deliberating at council level, whether or not we want to allow short-term rentals, such as allowing only a single on-street parking, allowing a finite number of licenses, 5 licenses, 10 licenses. I'm somebody that always wants to try to find a win-win when there's multiple parties involved. So that's really where I'm coming from. And like I said at the beginning of all this, and I've told many of my colleagues this, frankly, I don't think there are votes to support moving forward with short-term rentals in any capacity in town, but that's a council decision. That's not for planning and zoning to decide at this point. I think that Mr. Jakubiak's kind of glossed over some of the previous work that's already been put into this. And if town hall's not careful, there's an appearance that town hall is behind not allowing short-term rentals in any capacity. And I don't think that's a good look. The surveys aren't black and white, and this recent one is no different. I don't want to say it's inconclusive because there's data to be called from all these efforts. Are we going to keep continuing to try to cast a line to get better results? Are we looking for all or nothing results? We're certainly not going to get that. So really what council is faced with is there's some people that want them, some that don't. It's going to be all things considered. And do we want to allow them or not? That's kind of the fundamental vote I see there. And I know that several of us ran against unregulated short-term rentals. So that tells the public that they're open-minded enough to consider stringent regulations that would allow them to a limited extent. So I'm strongly against sending this back down to planning and zoning, unless if this governing body, including the mayor, vote to send it back down to planning and zoning, and I'll be on the losing end of that vote, but I'm okay with that. But I'm not okay with just kicking this around back and forth and up and down and back and back. And it's just not a good look. And for people watching this, it just, as the time goes by, it just looks really bad for us. And it's time for council to do its job and figure this out. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I'll just make a comment in there. And well, for one, we don't send anything down to planning and zoning. They're not below us. They're a separate board. But yeah, there's when you talk about a land use change, when you talk about the total unfairness of putting a commercial enterprise next to a family that bought a home in a residential area, to say, oh, okay, you know, I have a few friends that want to do this. I'm on their side. It's totally unfair to even think of making such a land use change without abiding by the town code and making it a part of a planning and zoning recommendation and vetting the public. But I think the key is, for me, is there's absolutely no sense of urgency at all. Having said that, Larry, you're up, sir, if you choose.
Yes, I do, and I'll be brief. I'll just echo a couple of sentiments, hopefully in a shorter version. I did watch the planning and zoning meeting a couple of months ago when they took up the issue of the short-term rentals, and it was at that meeting that they made the decision then to just send it on to council. We just have to stop kicking this back and forth between planning and zoning and the council. We have to take some action here, because if we decide to send this back to planning and zoning, they were expecting some direction. You know, and unless we give them some, I don't know what they're going to do. And if we have to wait until they're done with the comprehensive plan, that's many months from now before they would even take this issue up again. So, all right, I think we as the council need to give planning and zoning some direction on how they should consider this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Charlie.
Boy, this is tough. And you know, going last, I have the benefit of sort of hearing what other council people have said. I generally agree that it just doesn't feel right to me to kick it back, not down or up, but over to planning and zoning without some guidance. And I would maybe even throw out that if they're working on a comprehensive plan, how can they do that with such a significant issue unresolved, unless we consider it resolved? I don't know how you formulate a comprehensive plan for a town this size without knowing whether there would be an opportunity for B&Bs or short-term rentals. So I'm wondering if we should send this back to planning and zoning, and as painful as this is, especially for me, change the priorities and address this ahead of the comprehensive plan. I throw that out there. I don't know if there's will for that. I do support and would be willing to voice a vote on whether it's the right thing to send it back to planning and zoning, knowing that there would be at least a 6-month delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. And finally, Dr. Bodine.
Yeah, I was a little caught off guard. I didn't realize that we'd have to send it back. And so, I mean, we have to respect whatever legal advice we receive. At least I will respect whatever legal advice we receive. But I do want to be fair with planning and zoning. And by being fair, I mean providing them with some direction. In 2014, they took this up and they decided that no changes to the planning and zoning ordinance was required. And I think that is something we should look at eventually as a council, is a simple idea of giving or providing planning and zoning with a sense of whether we believe as a council through a future vote that changes to planning and zoning ought to be reviewed and looked at in regards to short-term rentals. I think that's one thing that would immensely help them, is giving them a sense of whether or not we support large changes, small changes, no changes, any change to the existing laws as it reads today. If not, I think they're kind of flying a little blind and it's kind of unfair. But saying that, if our law dictates through legal advice that this needs to go back to planning and zoning, then maybe planning and zoning can take up that question of whether they first and foremost believe any changes in the law need to occur. We've already seen that we can have successful bed and breakfasts, that short-term rentals can go that route. They really want to serve in such a way. And I have one starting in my neighborhood and I have absolutely no problem with it at all. Whereas I have problems with short-term rentals. So anyways, that's what I think. I will follow whatever legal advice we receive whenever that may come through because I feel like I have to. But I do think I think planning and zoning would appreciate a sense of the council, not here because it's not appropriate in a work session, as whether or not we expect changes to the laws that currently exist. Those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. It's been 2 hours, everybody. Heard a lot, have a lot to think about. I'm going to stop right here. Once we receive information from Todd, we'll share it for now. Let's just move on. We've heard a lot. Comprehensive plan update, Chris?
Okay. Well, I'm going to share my screen, Holly. Okay, can everybody see that, my screen? Yeah, okay, good. Well, it's good to be here. And, you know, at the end of the day, I'm hoping that the Planning Commission and the Mayor and Council will be on the same page. Certainly not required to be, but hopefully the Commission and the Town Council are converging as you think about the comprehensive plan and the future of the town. The Planning Commission will recommend a plan and you will adopt it, making it official. If you're not pleased with the document you get, your assignment would be to deny it or send it back with instructions to change. And the Planning Commission will have a chance to decide what it wants to do. And ultimately, if you cannot come to terms with or agreement with the Planning Commission, then the current plan that exists today would continue moving forward. But ultimately, it's the Planning Commission that has to approve the plan, but you as council approve the plan adopt the plan that they approve. Okay. So let me just give you a brief update. The working draft is on the town's website. It's been there since May 1st. The most important section of the plan is the land use section. The Planning Commission has not approved anything yet, just to be clear. A public hearing may be held in September. We were first thinking it would be in August, but practically speaking, we couldn't meet that month. And if we did, it may result in low attendance because August is a difficult time to hold public meetings. The next work session is June 15th, and the Planning Commission, to its credit, has been meeting every 2 weeks with a very extensive agenda, doing a lot of work well into the night. So my presentation really just focuses on land use. I'm not going to talk about all the other aspects of the plan, and I'm only going to talk about the proposed changes in the land use section, changes to what exists today. And I just do that because I want to be brief and to the point tonight. So let's first talk about the Maritime District. This blue line roughly delineates the Maritime Zoning District. The purpose of this area per the zoning ordinance is to basically facilitate mix of uses, residential, commercial, maritime, water-related uses. It would be essentially the vibrant maritime center for a growing town. That's basically how it reads now in the plan. The proposal in the current draft of the plan is to continue to allow commercial maritime uses in this area and recreational uses, but to not allow residential any longer in any capacity. Of course, there are some residential uses in this district already. There are captain's quarters, townhouse community, and the townhouse and multifamily development just off of Gordon Stinnett. And I guess that's about it. So we have two, also there's an apartment building here where my cursor is, just beyond Abner's too. So those are the existing commercial areas or residential areas, but no additional residential uses would be permitted under the current proposal. The building height in this area would be reduced from 70 feet to 35, plus 5 foot if it's necessary to bring a building out of the floodplain elevation. So potentially 40 feet. The proposal is to remove the bonus density overlay district. That allowed the number of housing units per acre to increase within this area. It allowed it to increase to 36 units per acre effectively. So that extra bonus would go away as well. So that's the maritime zone. Now, how about residential? And again, I'm only referring to the changes that are actually being proposed. Parts of the community, there's no changes whatsoever, so I'm not even going to address it. All these areas that I've outlined, they mostly cover the residential village zone, which is really a residential district that allows for a variety of housing types, from multifamily to townhouse to duplexes to single family, a whole variety. And you might know that there are all actually multifamily projects and townhouse projects in this area. So where I'm circling now, there's a housing project, and at the edge of this at the edge of this district here, there are townhouses. And of course, we have Horizons on the Bay and Seagate, Baycrest. These are all within the residential village zone. So what changes are being proposed? First, let me look at the areas where there's a dashed line, which includes this area where David Street is and D Street. This is First Street up here. The proposal is to limit the residential uses allowed here to just single family. So moving forward, there'd be no other residential types except for single family detached or single family uses. In this coastal area between Bayside Road and the Bay, extending from First Street all the way down to the Veterans Memorial, that would be treated the same way. Moving forward, there could be no more housing built except for single family housing. And the same thing would apply to the part of the residential village just south of Maryland 260 and north of Kellums Field. So this area here, by the way, here's the town hall where I'm circling. Okay, which right here rather. This area would no longer be, oops. This area could no longer have anything other than single family housing, no multifamily housing, no more duplexes or anything to that effect. Within the areas shown as with the dark yellow line, there would be no changes. So from Cox Road over to 260, things would remain the same. And we have Cassidy Court townhouses right there, for instance. So that pattern of development would be able to continue through this area. And the duplexes, condominiums, whatever, would still continue to be allowed within the middle subdivision, as this area of town is called. Now, let's look at a couple of proposed zoning changes, zoning map changes. If you see up here, the red box, that area is a series of houses plus one commercial business. And the proposal is to change this from commercial zone to single family residential. So it's treated like all the other residential up here. So this would eliminate the zoning for commercial. Then if you head down further south on Bayside Road in this kind of orange box here, this is the Veterans Memorial, just for context. This area is currently zoned high density residential. And the proposal would make this residential village just like everything else. So multifamily buildings with, that currently can go to 17 units per acre, that would be eliminated. Essentially, the only residential use here would be single family. The building height would remain at 35 feet, and there would be no bonus density overlay. Currently, the bonus density overlay covers this area, this little neighborhood up here, just south of First Street, and it covers Mama Lucia's restaurant, which is here. Those are kind of two vestiges of a much bigger bonus density overlay that had been mapped previously, but the mapped overlay district was changed, and these two areas were retained. The proposal as drafted would eliminate reference to that completely. In fact, it wouldn't be allowed anywhere in the town, the bonus density overlay. Okay. Next, an area where commercial is changing. This is what we've been calling the gateway commercial zone, if you will. Maryland 260 coming into town. The areas that are red, the properties that are red on this map are currently zoned residential, and they total 1.7 acres. This is where the Octagon is, Pizza Place, A1 Antiques. All this is currently zoned residential or commercial, and the plan is not to change that. It's to keep it commercial. But the plan is to expand this commercial area by bringing in an additional 1.5 acres. So these two parcels here, this land here, and then a couple more parcels off of Elm Street, and then it would be extended up to F Street. So this parcel would be zoned for commercial. And the commission is not interested in just simply zoning it commercial, then walking away from it. It wants to put some limitations on this area too, and create some opportunities. So first, it would allow residential apartments above commercial uses. Now, currently, you can do residential above commercial. So it would keep that intact, and it would apply that to this whole, everything within the blue zone here. It would eliminate the possibility of townhouses and multifamily housing, which are currently allowed on commercial properties. So, today we could conceivably see a proposal for a multifamily or townhouse right on 260 there. This plan would change that and would no longer be allowed. The plan would be, on the positive side, would be to create a pedestrian-friendly streetscape with improved sidewalks and landscaping and crosswalks to slow traffic down, to make this a place where you might be able to have dinner outside. There might be more restaurants, create a real sense of place as the gateway into Chesapeake Beach. And part of that would be to adopt design standards to create a unified character for this area, so that you knew when you were entering into it, there was a unified theme about signage and the look and the character of the buildings. There would be no residential allowed except for on the floor above the floor, or floor and a half above commercial. The building height would remain at 35 feet. Those things, in addition to one change with respect to resource conservation, are the main land use changes. And I'm going to talk about the resource conservation in a couple minutes. There's the sea level rise, which has with it a whole series of land use recommendations as well. And we've kind of discussed this at a previous meeting, but there's been some refinement over the period of time since we met. In addressing what our maps show us, we've created 3 layers of policy. And let me describe how those layers would work. And I'll use first this geography, this part of town. This is the central area of Chesapeake Beach, just the maritime marina area. Again, for reference, here's the town hall right here. So layer 1 is in the central part of town. This covers land areas that lie adjacent to naturalized areas, wetlands, and water. These are the areas projected to be underwater in the next 30 years or have a 1 in 10 annual chance of flooding. So our mapping reveals where water is expected to be the dominant feature of the landscape. And that's shown in the dark blue on this map. Currently, this map shows that lands that are currently not underwater are expected to be. So for instance, at the very end of Harbor Road, when Harbor Road stops and it becomes just a private drive, out here at the tip of Abner's where the railway used to come in, that area is expected to be open water in the next decades with the 2.1 foot sea level rise that's projected. The same can be said of this area on the north side of Fishing Creek. Right now, this is a boatyard up here. The boatyard part of this property is expected to have a 1 in 10 annual chance of flooding. And by comparison, the standard FEMA floodplain is 1% chance of flooding per year, or it's the 100-year flood zone. We call it 100-year flood, but this is actually would effectively be the 10-year flood, high risk. Every year you'd have a 10% chance of having a flood this big or greater. So all the areas that are shown in this shade of blue have a 1 in 10 chance of flooding in the next 20 to 30 years, by the year 2050, certainly. So, but this area here and the darker blue areas are all very much connected to the wetlands and the rising water and Fishing Creek. And these areas have a certain policy that's attached to them. First, the plan would recommend that they be considered resource conservation, that when we do a land use plan map, the recommendation is preserve the land in its current state, protect it from any intense development, allow nature to take its course, understand the viability of development on these properties is not very good, and it's not an area that we want to support land development on. So we're recommending that you would amend the zoning ordinance and the zoning map to allow only low impact water dependent uses and no intensification of existing uses. So for instance, you could still do aquaculture, you could still do boating and commercial fishing operations, and as the water rises, your uses can still continue to accommodate themselves to those conditions. But in terms of new buildings, no. In terms of additional water and sewer services or roads, no. The town, as this policy statement is, the town would not extend services to allow development in these areas. Okay. And how does layer 1 apply to the northern part of town? By the way, here's Seagate. Here's the Seagate. Here's Horizons. Here's the volunteer fire company. Okay, so we know where we are. Again, the areas that are open water and are expected to flood at a 1 in 10 chance annually are high risk. So that the houses that front the wetland now that are already seeing signs of the migration of the wetlands, those areas would come under the same policy. The recommendation would change from residential village to resource conservation. The zoning ordinance and map would be amended to allow only low impact development uses and no intensification of existing land use. Now, if you had a house in this area, and of course there are houses here, you can continue to live in that house, but we would be opposed to building any additional houses there, or building an addition to the house, or to expanding the footprint of development. The town will not extend any water and sewer service, roads, etc., to this area. Or to any, I mean, you can see that the open water really comes right up to Seagate now. It's quite remarkable. So you might say, well, there are some areas here, for instance, along C Street that are shown to have a 1 in 10 exceedance or flood probability. And our response is yes, but they already have roads attached to them and can be developed if proper care is taken. So that's we're going to refer to as level 2 or layer 2. So let's just stick with this geography. So level 2 would be, layer 2 would be areas projected to have a 1 in 10 annual chance of flooding that are served already by existing public streets. So for instance, these areas already are served by existing streets. The volunteer fire company, we're not going to abandon this part of the town and say it's resource conservation. Development decisions have been made. So the issue now is how to accommodate their evolution and their adaptation to sea level rise. So first we begin with the broad statement, the obvious statement, considerable care needs to be taken in use and development. 2, as a condition of development approval, developers would participate in building to town approved specifications with approved defenses where required to secure safety and sustainability over the long term. And 3, land development would be guided by the flood resiliency master plan. So when this project is finished, as you know, the town has been awarded a grant to do a flood resiliency plan, and that would follow this comprehensive plan. And we would get into the details of these issues with the coordination and participation of property owners, and come up with basic strategies that would allow, for instance, the continuation of land use and improvement of properties, but they would be done in a way that made sense in an area-wide perspective. As you know, it doesn't make sense for one property owner to raise his land or to build a seawall when the water gets right around it or the floodwaters are displaced to somebody else. We have to think about this systematically. And that's what this recommendation is for the layer 2 areas. And the layer 2 areas in the central part of the town are essentially along Gordon Stinnett Avenue, right? This area, here's the parking lot, and then here's the marina. I don't think the planning commission or anybody in town would say this area ought to be resource conservation, left to sort of go back to nature. Instead, because it's part of the central part of the town, it needs to adapt to the sea level rise conditions. And the town wants to facilitate that adaptation by using a master plan to guide it. So that's what we're doing in the layer 2. And then there's a layer 3, which for many people might be the most important one. And that's existing developed lands that will be at high risk. They're projected to be at 1 in 10 chance of annual flooding. And those are the communities like Seagate. You see all the roads are projected to be in 2050 flooded frequently. And they are now. I mean, and then, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Seagate or, oh goodness. The residential communities along the coast here on east of 261, same issue. We have a vital concern to make sure that they can adapt to these changes, because if they don't, we know in the decades ahead, the water will begin to undercut the quality of life in those areas. So the master plan is that we want to do would formulate acceptable options for each of these areas and for these existing communities, so that their residents know what to expect, can be involved and affect the outcome of the planning. And certainly if any redevelopment would be proposed in the short term, then the projects would be treated as if they were in layer 2, meaning if you're going to redevelop in these zones, you need to redevelop in a way that builds our defenses and it fits into the bigger picture of protection for the town. So that's all I wanted to cover tonight. That's the basic land use set of changes. There are a few others, but because of limits of time, I won't get into them. But these are the principal changes to the land use plan.
Thank you, Chris, and I appreciate that. That was excellent. And I guess I'll hear some comments from the council before we move forward to our next item. So I'll begin with Dr. Bodine.
Yes, having listened to all the tapes of all these planning and zoning meetings, I think Chris did a really nice job of providing a summary to council. This is what they have been discussing and have been agreeing upon. I've been quite impressed in listening to those meetings that they go through a list of things to be decided, and then they take a vote. And then the large majority of those votes are unanimous. And so it's a well thought out plan. And I like the way that it's going. And at first blush, I agree with these changes. I think that takes into account a lot of desires that town residents have had for a long time, namely controlling residential growth, controlling building heights, and accounting for potential climate change. So I think it takes into account things that have been discussed for at least the 2.5 decades that I've lived here. So thank you very much for presenting a very concise description of what that group has been working on, and y'all are to be commended. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Charlie?
Yeah, a couple of things. Try to keep this brief. I know it's late. I love the thinking that was done around these multiple layers. That's really clear and concise. And I think those are good ways to think about some of these different lands as they're going to be impacted by sea level rise. Chris, I have a couple specific questions. In the maritime zone, you said that, if I understood something, there was a moot point there. You said that there would be no new residential permitted, and that the bonus density overlay would be removed. Yeah, there you go. So what, isn't that last point kind of irrelevant then?
Yes, it is irrelevant unless the mayor and council decides not to adopt a zoning ordinance to affect this recommendation. I mean, you could basically say, okay, we agree with the planning commission on most things, but we want to keep residential. In that case, the bonus density still is an independent recommendation.
Gotcha. Good. Okay. You mentioned that in the area that's residential, if I understood it correctly, the proposed changes that would happen, what would happen if Mama Lucia's then changed ownership, or they wanted to do a major renovation or something like that? Would that then be prohibited? Could that end up being dead space or actually be redeveloped as residential?
Well, Mama Lucia's is a non-conforming use now. It's currently a commercial use in a residential village zone. So it's not a permitted use currently. And we're not changing that. It would continue to be a non-conforming use. And it has used up all the expansion that it was entitled to under the non-conforming regulations of the town. So it cannot be expanded any further. It can be customized inside, and it could be changed to another commercial use that's less intensive than a restaurant, but it's effectively locked into place in its current form.
Okay, and these changes don't change that.
Correct.
Okay, last question is in the town gateway area. You said that they were allowing, I was just curious about the wording here and the height. So allow residential apartments. Is there magic to the word apartments? Does that mean they can't be condominiums?
Oh, no, not at all. I was just thinking the term as residential flats.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever term you want.
And
Ownership is not relevant. No, right.
And if the height limit is 35 feet, is that even realistic?
It's very much constrained, without a doubt. It's constrained. You're really talking, well, I mean, you're talking about a 2-story building. So the top floor could be commercial and the ground floor would be retail or office.
Okay.
But you as it's being proposed, you couldn't put 2 levels or 1.5 levels because you're pretty certain to go over that of the 35-foot height limit.
Okay, thank you. Great presentation. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks.
Larry?
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for the update. Always helpful to see what's going on here. Couple comments. One is I very strongly support the issues regarding protection from climate change. I think that's going to have a very dramatic impact on our town. Just looking at some of those maps on what I call SLR, sea level rise, we're going to need to take a lot of precautions for a lot of facilities around here, including the firehouse, including Route 261, providing access. I realize those issues are state highway related, but they're going to have to start paying attention to that stuff pretty soon. And then a question for you, Chris, based on my listening in on earlier comprehensive plan meetings, in several places, there's a reference to a 35-foot height limitation. My understanding is not only is it a 35-foot height limitation, how it is measured will change as well, because I thought there was the plan to measure it from grade level, as opposed to right now, if there is a parking structure on the first level, it is measured from the top of that parking structure. Is that correct?
Well, I recall, I guess it was back in the fall of 2020, when the Planning Commission first began discussing the height limit, that the intention was to define building height from the grade and to exclude the parking, the parking level. In other words, 35 is 35. You don't measure from the top of the parking level upwards. And in fact, the Planning Commission directed that I write a set of zoning amendments that would bring about that whole set of changes, so that it would be 35 foot across the board. And in that document, it's a public document. In it, you'll see that I wrote it so that your interpretation is correct. Building height would simply be measured from the ground up, and the extra, height that you would get with parking under the building would be eliminated. 35 is 35.
That's my understanding, and I'll just offer the comment that if that gets put in place, if that were to have been in existence a long time ago, many of the structures in our town would not have been able to be built. Thank you. That's all I got.
Yeah, and Larry, I mentioned that was the discussion in October or November, but when the discussion of building height's been batted around a little bit in this year, in this time frame, we've not made any deliberations on this issue. So right now, that issue has not been resolved. And in fact, I hadn't even thought about that until I got the EDC's comments. Your letter, thank you, by the way. The letters were spot on, and the commission's going to take up that letter, I believe, at this next meeting. So we'll find out at that meeting what the commission thinks about that particular aspect of building height.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Yeah, and before I move on to Greg, while I'm thinking of it, one thing that when they're discussing, building height is parking is an issue in Chesapeake Beach. So off-street parking is good, and I'll just leave it at that. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, that was a good comment there, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I don't really have any questions for Chris. I have a couple comments for Chris, some comments for my colleagues in this. I'd certainly like to talk about and continue talking about some of the proposed changes with my colleagues and other town leaders outside of this meeting. It's just, we're kicking stuff around, talking about stuff, trying to come up with the best decisions we can. And I think we're all trying to fill that role. Certainly impressed with planning and zoning's efforts so far. They've had some marathon meetings. They seem to stay on track. Kudos to Chairman Brown. I think he's doing a great job. I disagree with some of the things that have been presented this evening here, Chris, and I strongly agree with others. And on that, this is kind of for my colleagues and the mayor here. I think when this comes around to council, Chris, I do like knowing where planning and zoning, where the commissioners, where they voted on some of these key issues. So in other words, knowing that they unanimously voted on some important key issues, very important to me. And I would think that it should take quite a bit for town council to not accept that and to try to change it, frankly. So again, knowing where planning and zoning votes on some of these key issues is something that I'm listening to. It should be important to all of us. And really last but not least, and you touched on it a little bit in your presentation this evening, Chris, bridges from the current plans to proposed plans, things that any devices on maps, any kind of companion notes that can go along with a final product from planning and zoning would really go a long way, helping us understand what the proposed changes are and helping us get to the meat and potatoes of this comprehensive plan. We need to, when it gets to council, we're going to need to do that as quickly as possible anyway. So those are really my only comments. And I was glad to see we had an update this evening. I learned a lot, and I'll continue to have open ears. Thank you.
Thanks.
You with us, Keith?
I am. I didn't hear you call my name, so I will go forward. So yeah, thank you, Chris. Great presentation. I don't have any questions for you. I will echo one of Greg's comments there about reasoning behind some of the changes. If you guys can provide crib notes of some sort or documentation on why you were feeling certain changes were necessary or why you decided upon them, that would be helpful. I found myself wondering at times just what was the reasoning behind some of the changes. Anyway, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And lastly, Derek.
Yeah, thank you as well. I echo actually what Keith just said and what Greg said before. It would be helpful to get some of that background as well when we contemplate some of these things. I don't have any questions, but I do request if we could get a copy of this presentation. I really like how it was laid out, and I think it would be useful if we could. So thank you.
Okay, very good. 4 items left. General paving services RFP. Holly?
Yes. Sorry, let me just share my screen. Okay. So the town went out to bid for general paving services within the town. The bid proposals are due back June 10th. We do plan to have this before town council in the June town meeting. So we just wanted to go through with town council regarding the scope of work and see if there were any questions. And I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Okay, I'll lead off with Vice President Favre.
Okay, I do have actually a number of questions, some for Jay, some for Holly. Let me start with Jay. So on the page that's showing right now shows the areas being considered. I'll focus primarily on the first area, 27th, 28th, 29th streets and in that general area. Some of these areas we know require stormwater drainage remediations or mitigations, some work to better control the flow of stormwater or even some, more major repairs in that area. So will this work accompany any improvements to stormwater drainage in that area or will it, I assume the contractor would understand, that we would have issues in that area and that they would need to ensure that they didn't get worse at minimum. But are there any opportunities for improvements of the stormwater area is in conjunction with the paving?
Sure. So yeah, I remember walking and driving that with you, Derek, and I understand exactly your question. So the truth is minimal. We're going to do some V-ditch lines that are kind of deteriorated now and some asphalt curbs and some other areas, but there's no part of this that's going to create any new storm drains, if you will. It will improve some existing just because I'm going to say the throats to the inlets and other things have deteriorated. So paving it will help that. But as far as what we looked at earlier, how areas have V-ditches, some have sidewalks, some have curbs, that's not really being addressed globally by resurfacing. Now, there is one area we left out that I think there's an opportunity where there's a piece of town sidewalk and the road there is not bad. So I took all of that into consideration. And honestly, depending on how the bid prices come back, there's 2 other roads, part of 29th Street that would score next. If we're able to accomplish some more, that would be part of this. And that does have already good drainage in different areas and the road is not as bad. But as far as curb and gutter, new storm inlets and sidewalks and things are like that, I want to be clear that that is not part of this.
Okay. Well, actually, in your comments segue to my next question really well. How much of the highway user revenue funds are we expecting to be used, just percentage wise, not dollar figure? And the genesis of the question is, and you've heard me say before, we have other approved uses for highway user revenue monies other than paving. Will there be any potential, or do you expect there be any other revenues remaining after this work to be used for other approved uses of these funds?
Well, there's two things. One is I called the asphalt plant as of today in Waldorf, and it's basically a petroleum byproduct. So the price of asphalt is very fluid, literally. So I'm anticipating that this will cost anywhere from 0.7 to 100% of what highway user revenue is. I do think there will be opportunity to pave more or do other projects. The caveat is we have to spend it in this fiscal year. So I don't know what other projects are shovel ready to do.
Yeah, Charlie and I may have some ideas for you, but that's a conversation for another day. But just extending on that. So I know you have a really good priority spreadsheet of all the roads in town. As a suggestion, perhaps could we either add to that spreadsheet or create a new matrix that would include other approved uses of the highway user revenue monies to factor into the priorities? Because right now the priorities are just applied to repaving of streets, and obviously that's very important. But if we have other opportunities that may be similarly as a priority, perhaps if we could evaluate those together. So either adding to the spreadsheet or creating a new matrix that includes the other approved uses for these funds would be my recommendation.
Yes, and I agree with that. So I would suggest making it standalone, and that way it doesn't, we can always modify my score sheet and see where we're at. Because basically, I was speaking with Holly earlier, we had a matrix and we have our own score sheet. We're going to get to the point, if we keep receiving this highway user revenue money, where we will be caught up and we will actually be needing other projects. So I think that's a good idea.
And then just one other question, going to B Street in particular, but I know some of the other ones may be opportunity as well. I mean, there's not a lot of room there, but is there any opportunity to widen some of these streets through this repaving effort to, just provide a little bit more room for, emergency vehicles, snow plowing, things like that? Or is that, I know that's complicated, but is there any opportunity to perhaps widen some of these streets at all with the repaving effort?
There are a few areas, and that's one of the reasons why we do day-to-day with the contractor and kind of walk the site after they mill, and we pay them by the square yard, even though we gave them rough square yardage so they know what they could bid out. And the more we have, the cheaper price we get. When we get to areas where there is an opportunity, since they're paid by the square yard, we can make field adjustments. But to be honest, we've walked that a few times. There's not a lot of opportunity right there on B Street. But where there is, I know of 2 spots as you go around the corner of 11th, we're going to widen that. And at the very bottom of 11th, where the U-turn is, we're going to do a little modification there. But in that particular area you've been down, it's pretty tight. There's not a lot of area to widen it.
Right. Yeah, I was just using that more as an example than anything
Sure.
else. Okay. No, thanks, Jay. This is great. I don't have any further questions.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Keith?
No additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, a couple questions. Thank you. Jay, the work, and I know you have this prioritized based on some previous data that you have, and so you're not just kind of throwing darts at the dartboard here. I know there was an educated approach to selecting these areas and prioritizing them. The Harbor Road work, I see that you have that listed as just a simple mill and overlay. Is that because that was shown under future flooding down the road? Chris's previous presentation, but that's slated for just simple mill and overlay right now.
Correct. And if you look, I don't know if Holly can scroll down to the actual sky view of that, I'm going to call it satellite view. You'll see that it ends before that prone area to flooding, not just because I'm anticipating the flooding, because of the condition of the road. So if you go east of where my line ends, that road's in pretty good shape. They did a lot of improvements at Abner's and Howland, and that road's actually good. I'm actually ending it where that yellow line ends, which is kind of just past the library parking lot, the first entrance to Captain's Quarter.
Right.
The rest of that road down below there and as you go all the way down is not in bad shape. And of course, as you get past the last Captain's Quarter Howland project, that's no longer a town road, that's private.
Okay. You really, I'm going to be brief. The rest of my comments are really just related to quality control.
Sure.
You know, and I'm a contractor, and I see where you've got crack seal here at Chesapeake Village. I know that there was a company that was hired a while back to do some crack seal through Richfield Station, and I really thought they did a poor job. I did. The cracks that, I mean, it was like the guy had a squirt gun and he really didn't seal it, in my opinion. I don't know if they were rushing or not. I don't know when that was, where that was a little while back. I don't want to say the company's name. Then we do business with them, and you know, and they're a good company. Jay, you all do a great job in oversight, and I know you can't be everywhere. Last year, Woodland Court was scheduled to be milled and overlaid, and I remember specifically that contractor really was really rushing to squeeze in Richfield, the end there, Woodland Court. It led to like some irregularities between where they stopped and started. It's my opinion that the cul-de-sac and Richfield Station is going to prematurely fail at some point. There's an openness to the material that was provided, and if we have some strong freeze-thaw cycles, I mean, that's really what's going to precipitate that. You know, and we're a little wavy down here too. You know, part of that remains to be seen when we have snow plows coming through. And it's not the end of the world, and it looks great. I'd probably give them a C on that. But I remember that particular day you were out of town. And when I say that, I know you can't be everywhere, and you can't. You know, even with 3Js. So on all of that, I know I had sent an email to Holly, and we kind of kicked that back and forth a little bit. I don't know if that was a year or two back, but I would suggest putting some language, if you don't have it already, in your ITB. There being some threat of testing for this stuff.
Well, not to interrupt you, Greg. So if you read into the RFP, we did add third-party inspections. So we're getting density,
Awesome.
we're getting cores if necessary, and also loads, temperature of the load. So I remember you stating that, and I think it's valid. And for the money we're spending, I think it's worth it. So yes, third-party inspection is on every load that comes in, and also depth, density, milling. So I think we're covered there.
Yeah, and I understand these things are imperfect, and I get it. And I'm not suggesting that it was a failed effort down on this end or with the crack sealing years ago, necessarily. But there being a threat of it being tested or cored, that keeps a contractor on their feet. I remember going through a process out here with Mr. Repke, and the HOA was testing some stuff that was going to get turned over to it. And we came out and we were core drilling some areas, and I know they were surprised that we were doing that, and that just keeps people on their toes. You know, not spending too much money on testing inspection, but that being an aspect, I'm glad to hear that you've kind of rolled that into some of the oversight, because frankly, you need some of that support. That isn't any different than some of our other volunteer boards or planning and zoning, relying on some of our professional, you know, engineers for support as well.
Sure, sure.
I know there was a Howland property, and I don't know when the town paved it, and you're aware of it. And as far as I'm concerned, that problem's been resolved. But I know there was some paving that was done, which caused some inadvertent sheet flow changes in the areas. And that goes back to Vice President Fabre's comments there, trying to be cognizant of pitches on roads. That comes into play with mill and overlay as well. We want to try to not change things that are working, but we know it's all imperfect too. So we aim high, and we fall in a little lower than that. I think everybody's happy. It's my only comments, and appreciate the job you're doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Larry?
Thanks. And most of my questions have already been answered. And if I missed this one, I apologize. What's the budget for this work?
I think Dale, if he's on there, could answer that better
Yeah,
than me.
Larry, we have about 280,000 we've received so far, and it's about 320.
Okay, so we might have to come up with 40K.
Well, the last couple years, they've had a big payment in June. So I'm anticipating somewhere around 300 and change.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate Jay's earlier comment that the asphalt prices are just skyrocketing. So we ought to be prepared for the worst. Thank you. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Charlie?
Yeah, I have no additional questions. Jay, you gave me some time the other day where you saw some of the things we want to be able to do. So I just echo Derek's thoughts, and that could be something that we do offline. No time pressure on that, but otherwise this was great. So thank you.
Thank you,
Sure.
Charlie. And lastly, Valerie?
Yes, quickly, the alley between 27th and 28th, did the remainder of the length of the alley not score as high as what is going to be completed?
It did not. It scored just below it, but like I said, depending on where these prices come in, this score sheet, while they're in that area, if it's underbid for our highway user revenue, we're going to go to the next criteria on the score sheet and add to it. It's also cost effective geographically while they're there to do that road. So once we get the prices in, we know our square yardage, we can immediately adjust to the next level down on that score sheet. And as you move east on that alley, that's going to be part of it. Also part of 29th Street. It depends on where the numbers come in. And also, like I said, with the score sheet, which I was going to send it to Holly today and I never got around to it, we'll share that with you. But next year, those streets that were left off will be the highest ones on that score sheet, if that makes sense.
I think you hit upon the reason I asked, and that's because it's where it's spatially clustered. It makes sense that if you're there, just kind of like complete it, but I understand the scorecard. And since it's been implemented, it's been really effective in seeing where we're going to be paving.
Great.
Second question was on B Street. And I'm just going to ask, because I know you're doing it, but with the problems that we've had on the slope there, I'm just going to assume that whatever paving work occurs is going to take into account stormwater management in regards to any more instability around that cliff. Is that fair enough that you're going to take that into account?
Yes, and that's one of the specific reasons I've done it on every bit of B Street is it's a complete mill and overlay. And I'll be honest, there's some of those areas as you go down the hill that are not in bad enough shape to mill, but while we're there, we're milling and overlaying to not change any of the grades or pitch in the roads or contours. It's a very sensitive area, as you know, and the bottom line is once you get south of 13th, B Street is all downhill, and there is no storm drainage. It goes down the hill down towards Brownies Beach, or I'm sorry, the B Street pump station. Now we have some stormwater berms down there that send that water into the marsh, if you will, versus to the beach, which has made a big improvement. But basically, we're going to put back what is there, not to increase any of the stormwater risk or put any more water on the cliff edge.
Could we, although too late now, but would this have been an opportunity? I know we don't want to increase stormwater runoff, but would this have been an opportunity to maybe address some of the issues there during the paving project to better what currently exists for stormwater management? Did we miss an opportunity?
I do not think so with highway user revenue. That's apples and oranges. They can pave the road. And if there would be a stormwater project, I think there, Valerie, it would be increasing the shoulder, if you will, or the footprint of the road, working with the town's right of way to do something beyond the road. The road is so narrow now, there's no opportunity to really do it in the road. So that could be something done in the future. And I don't think paving it is going to inhibit that. There might be a few areas where it's paved and we'd have to cut it, but I think to do storm water improvements, you'd have to go outside of the footprint of the road to capture some of that water.
And is that an appropriate use for highway user funds or not?
I'm sorry, Valerie, I didn't hear the end there.
Is that a allowable use for highway user funds?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, that's all my questions, Jay. Thank you very much. You do great.
Sure, sure.
Okay, thank you. Next is dredge containment rehabilitation. Holly?
Yes, thank you. So we've been speaking with the Army Corps of Engineers as they're planning through the jetty rehabilitation as well as the Fishing Creek dredge of the channel. And we are being asked to take twice as much dredge containment spoil than we have in the past due to the amount of work that they have to do to reach the jetty wall. So we're bringing this topic to town council as discussion. We have a grant into the Maryland Waterway Improvement Fund of $250,000 for this work. I've spoken with DNR staff and they believe that the town will receive that funding. However, they cannot issue an award letter yet. They don't have the final determination. So they have advised the town to proceed at our own risk. Our challenge at this point is that the work really needs to be started immediately. Just due to the timing for contractors, this is the time where they could get it done. However, if we wait and get closer to late summer or even midsummer, they possibly will be too busy to take this on. So we have a provision in our town charter for procurement that allows us to piggyback onto another local government's contract. And Calvert County does have a contract with Edwin and John Crandall Incorporated for this type of site work. So at this point, we are speaking with Crandall to determine an estimated cost for the work to remove the spoil from the containment site so that we can be ready for the federal dredge and jetty wall improvement.
Thank you, Holly. And I, just for the council's sake, we spent a lot of time talking about this in staff, and my feeling is to go ahead and to move forward. This needs to get done, move forward. We're fairly confident that we will get the DNR money, later, but we found a way to move forward, and I think that'll serve the town best. And I think the council understands that and wants to get moving on this as well. But we'll start with Valerie for comment here.
Yeah, for the dredge material that is currently in there that needs to be removed, where is it going?
So that is to be determined. Crandall actually has a location where they can take the spoil, which is one of the reasons why we would like to work with them. They have a facility. So it would be moved potentially off-site would be the goal.
Well, as it's dredged or after it drains through the spoil site?
So we need to remove the material that is currently there in the containment. So what's there now to make room for what is new.
Is all the dredge material in the dredge spoil site from our last dredge, the town's last dredge, the Corps of Engineers dredge, or is there any other materials that have been placed there by anyone else?
We did 2 partial dredges with Maryland Waterway Improvement funding that placed containment or spoil in the containment site.
Okay.
All right.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie?
I have no additional questions. The only comment is I certainly support, it certainly makes sense to me to move forward with this. I see no reason why we wouldn't do that.
Thank you, Charlie. Larry?
Question. My understanding of this is basically a federal project primarily to serve access to the Navy pier facility there. Why is it the town's responsibility then to dispose of the dredge material?
Historically, the town has always offered the DMP site as a area for them to place the spoil. And we did speak with the Army Corps of Engineers about the possibility of the town not being able to clear this containment site in time and what that would do to the project. And the initial response is that they would likely dredge less or do less work. So they're really counting on the town to have this facility available for them.
I understand, but it's to their benefit to have the dredge there. Just something to keep in mind. Hopefully it all works out. Thank you.
Well, and before I go to Greg, I'll just, Larry, just give a little bit of history since I've been going through this since 1996. A lot of times when you don't deal with the feds, they go elsewhere with their money. So it's kind of playing ball to play ball. But having said that, Greg?
Yes, thank you. I guess question since this is a federal project, I guess gaming revenue, that's a state issue. That none of that really goes to federal. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm generally in support of the mayor's comments here. I know peripherally there have been some discussions of using some dredge spoils at Kellums and some dredge spoils of trying to elevate some open areas that could be subject to future flooding. That's just as an aside. I presume those conversations will go on. That's it. I think otherwise I'm generally supportive of just moving forward with this thing and making it happen. I know there are the dredging. It's interesting to me that the dredging, we're keeping the Navy front center there, but a lot of our dredging efforts are to the benefit of some private businesses in there that in part are there through this gaming revenue. I know there's a lot of ways for the state and the federal government to get funds down our way. So I'm optimistic, and I would hope that the government would step up to the plate when it came time to paying their share of these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, no additional questions. Sounds good. Thank you.
Lastly, Derek?
Yes, thank you. So we have a dredge fund. I don't recall the amount we have in there, but I believe it's enough, worst case, to cover the monies needed for this work. Am I correct?
We have about 700,000 in the
All right.
fund
All
available.
right. Plenty then. Okay, great. Thank you.
All righty. Next, Chesapeake Bay Detachment Naval Research Laboratory, CBD, NRL mitigation. Holly?
Yes, and I just wanted to recognize that we have had Wayne Newton on the call. He's sat through all of the meetings. So thank you, Wayne. He's been available for us. So the NRL CBD mitigation response, there was a recent RAB meeting of community members and several town council members that are on the RAB discussing the mitigation efforts out at the detachment facility, which has also prompted a lot of questions from town residents in terms of how the town is going to respond to some of their local findings. The town issued a press release that we voluntarily tested all of our town drinking water sources, and they came back with no traces of PFAS, and we released that to the public. We've also provided some additional information as it has been requested regarding chain of custody and how we've approached the testing. And so we did want to update the public and town council on what we plan to do moving forward. Again, MDE is the regulating agency for the efforts that are taking place at the CBD NRL. And we are working with MDE to coordinate additional testing. All of this testing is voluntary. It's not regulated at this point in any capacity for the town. But I've listed a couple areas that we are looking at. We're looking at our oysters in terms of sampling some of our older oysters and some of our younger oysters to provide those results. We also have moved forward with Bayfront Park waters testing at both the creek and at the beachfront. Jay initiated that test, which will be collected tomorrow, and results should be available in 10 to 14 days. We are also looking at treating our water reclamation treatment plant effluent. John expects to be able to move forward with that in the month of June. And we're also looking at ways to continually monitor the town's drinking water. So at this point, based on the no detect, it's suggested that we revisit that within a year and test the water sources again. As of right now, we do not have a budget amendment required, but there could be potentially a request for an amendment in the future. I have asked MDE to assist the town in additional testing as well. So I will provide an update to town council as I have it.
Thank you, Holly. I'll take any comments or whatever from, I'll start with Derek.
Well, no, really just want to applaud you, Holly, and everyone on the administration staying in front of this. Obviously, public relations in this manner is going to be very, very important. Participation in the RAB and doing our own testing and communicating those to our residents and in our neighboring communities are going to be very, very important. So I applaud you on that and just recommend that we continue to do that as much as possible. Just again, keeping this out in front, giving everyone in our town the confidence that we're looking into this, we're aware of it, and we're going to continually monitor and keep them protected is going to be huge. So again, thank you for all you're doing there. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Derek. Keith?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll just echo that great proactive response. I really appreciate it. I know the residents do too, because there has been a bit of concern expressed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Greg?
Leaning on MDE, I think is important for me, just with the perspective I have. The town efforts and its interests are separate and different from the RAB and its mandate. That's something to keep in mind. One thing that I wanted to mention through all of this, I know that we all love our armed forces, and we've got these laboratories, different places across the country. And without them, we may not have won World War II. Some of the things that they're working on now are vitally important to national security. So I know we're dealing with them with the utmost respect there. However, the Navy is interested in the Navy there on site. And the RAB's mandate is dealing with that on site there. I applaud the town, as Councilman Favre has, running concurrent with this, going above and beyond what some of these, the normal ways of testing some of this can go a long way with alleviating the anxieties in the community. But otherwise, thank you for your update.
Thank you, Greg. Larry?
As everyone I think knows, both Councilman Morris and myself serve on the Restoration Advisory Board, the RAB. And I think one of our main missions is to try to keep the light on the Navy to address this issue. As Mr. Morris pointed out, they have other priorities which are essential to our country's protection. So I think it's important that we try to keep the light shining on them to address this issue. And that's what our role will continue to be. I did want to just make one comment on the memo from Holly. In the second paragraph, it talks about the fire suppressant testing, including the testing of what's called AFF, this aqueous film foaming, has been ongoing since 1968. I just wanted to clarify, it's my understanding that they have stopped testing AFF. There's no further testing there. Holly, is that your understanding as well?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear in the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And Charlie?
I just want to echo what other folks have said, that I've been one that's heard from some residents, and I think it's great input. The residents paying attention. I hope that they're taking confidence in what I see is the town just dotting every I and crossing every T, and I think it's great. Particularly to Councilman Morris and Jaworski for being on the committee. So, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Valerie?
Yeah, I have no comments. I'll just say that I think Derek made a really good point about we need to continue to be upfront and out front with the testing and everything that we're doing so that the public can have confidence in the resources around us. We just need to be cognizant of that and keep putting out the information. So looks like a good approach so far. That's it.
Thank you, Valerie. And I'll end echoing all of your comments. And I want to really thank Holly and Larry and Greg and everybody else on council that's, put in their efforts on this. The town of Chesapeake Beach has, in my opinion, been more transparent, more proactive than any other body that I've been reading about, certainly in Maryland. And this is an issue all over the state. And because of that, we're able to keep the public confidence level high. So rest assured that the town of Chesapeake Beach will continue to be proactive and transparent. Having said that, thank you, everybody. Hot water heater purchase at the water park. Holly?
Yes, thank you. So we have a very old hot water heater at the water park that requires replacement. This purchase will be allocated in the next fiscal year. We've provided some proposals here and a summary of the work that would be required. And the goal would be to put this before town council in the upcoming town meeting to award to S.J. Johnson in the amount of $16,990.
Okay, let me begin with Valerie.
It's time. Most of us don't have cars that are 25 years old. Some things just need replacement over time. It's time. No questions.
Okay, thank you. Charlie?
If the water park team knows what they need, and I support it.
Larry?
I want to make sure I have plenty of hot water when I go in the shower. I support it. Thank you.
There you go. Greg?
Real brief. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Holly, the warranty specs for the IFB, were there warranty requirements? Because I see the two low bidders have distinct differences in what how long they're covering some parts.
Mm-hmm. Jay, did you want to speak to that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so those were coming from the actual plumbers themselves. The warranty on the product is a manufacturer's warranty, but there's some other things, the manifold, the gas line, different things that the two vendors supply different warranties on, but the product itself is a manufacturer warranty as long as it's installed by licensed vendors, which obviously we wouldn't take bids from anyone else.
Okay, and the original is gas fired?
Yeah, and so just real quick, the original was a 200-gallon, just like most of us have. I call it a boiler. It cooked 200 gallons of water all day. What we're replacing with is heat on demand or instant hot water. So same fuel source, LP gas, but this will heat the water as needed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm fully familiar with those systems. This brings my last question. Is it an oxymoron to have a 100-gallon storage capacity tankless water heater?
So, and I talked about that, and I didn't meet that vendor personally, but we followed up with some phone calls, myself, Marilyn, and Philo. What that does, groundwater, I mean, I know this because I deal with it, it comes out of the ground at about 57 degrees. So what this does, it brings it out of the ground and lets it go to ambient temperature before it starts heating it. Okay. So it's still considered tankless because the actual firing of the water is in the tankless part, but what it does, it allows 100 gallons at a time to get to ambient temperature before it starts heating it to the 98 degrees. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sure.
That's it.
Thank you, Greg. Keith?
No, that hit on my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, Derek?
Yeah, nothing further from me either. Thank you.
Okay, lastly, stay right there, Derek. Council lightning round. We'll start with Derek.
All right, well, it's been a very long meeting tonight. I want to thank those who made it to the end, and I think I've said enough, so I'll just part with that. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
And Keith? Thank
Yeah, I
you.
just wanted to take a moment and thank the Planning and Zoning Commission again for their hard work on the comprehensive plan over the last couple of months. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for showing up for our meeting. All right.
Okay. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, my only comment really is about the short-term rental. I really like to see council vote this up and down. They want to have this or not. That we need to get past this and update the code one way or the other. Otherwise, in the end, I wanted to actually lead in with, I'm not going to complain about any meeting links here with what planning and zoning's been going through. Kudos to them. I'm here every step of the way. Thank you.
Okay, Larry?
Just thanking everyone for sticking with us tonight. I wanted to just thank and congratulate my colleagues for what I thought was a very thorough yet cordial discussion of issues, even though we had differing opinions. So thank you all.
Thank you, Larry. Charlie?
You know, I was going to make a quip about the long meeting and my laptop battery, but after Greg's comments, I think instead I'm going to also tip my hat and say we can dig our heels in and stay late if they can, and they're doing it twice a month. So good for them. Thank you for that work.
Thank you, Charlie. And finally, Valerie?
The work of planning and zoning is quite obvious through the product that we saw tonight, so I would like to thank them. Second, I'd like to thank those that participated in the Bayfront vine clipping and litter pickup. That was successful on Saturday. And then just remind everyone that there's a fun event coming up, and that's the End Hunger and Calvert County Dragon Boat Races. It'll be at the Chesapeake Beach Spa and Resort this Saturday. It's going to be a good time.
What time?
We'll leave that. What time?
Yeah.
I know I'm volunteering, so I need to be there at 8. I think they probably start at 9 like normal.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have it.
Night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.